The whole earth seemed to rumble beneath him as Carlos Garcia stood there, standing up at the hulking, shadowy mass towering over him. His knees were shaking, and sweat was running down his face, but he clenched his jaw and stayed put. Furious voices hurled abuse at him from all angles. The stench of gasoline and wood smoke filled the air as the rumbling grew louder and louder. Gripping the camcorder tightly, Carlos pointed it straight up at the enormous excavator that was belching out smoke just feet away from him. Angry men in high-visibility jackets hung off the sides of it, making hand gestures at him and even throwing rocks. But Carlos found, much to his surprise, that his filming hand was steady. He panned the lens across the view in front of him. Excavators, lumberjacks, standing on cut-down tree trunks as thick as motorcycles, and then up into the lush canopies of the Amazon rainforest with its rich, dark green leaves, dense knotted vines, colorful fruits, and terrified ecosystem. Colorful birds watched the scene with nervous eyes, ready to take off at a moment's notice. All of the larger animals had either run away or been killed long before he showed up. Carlos swung the camcorder back down to the mercenaries chopping down his beloved rainforest and jabbed a finger at them.
You will not put your axe to the trunk of one more tree without first cutting me down!
Sick of waiting, the workmen climbed back into their vehicles and started revving their engines. It was all for show, Carlos told himself. That's all it was. They were just trying to scare him, but it was working. He was scared. The excavator in front of him crept slowly forward with tires that were taller than he was. A foot away, 6 inches away, and then an inch away. Carlos closed his eyes and readied himself to be run over, but the pain never came. A whining, chewing noise came from the engine, as if the vehicle was suddenly trapped on something, unable to turn its wheels. Carlos opened his eyes and tried to peer around the edge of the vehicle to see what was going on at the back. There was a new note in the voices of the workmen around him. They didn't seem so angry anymore, more fearful. Carlos went to take a step to see what was going on, but his foot caught and he was trapped. Looking down, he saw that he had somehow managed to lodge his foot beneath a small tree root. He tried to pull himself free, but the grip tightened. All of a sudden, the roots wound tightly around his boots, instantly crushing his foot and breaking every bone inside of it. Carlos screamed, but through the dullness of terror that was filling his mind, he realized no one else would hear him because they were all too busy screaming themselves. The root wasn't just tightening around his foot, now it was pulling him, dragging him. The dirt parted around his crushed foot as the root dragged him down into the earth. It wasn't that the ground was swallowing him. It was that the root was pulling so hard that the ground broke apart around his body. The pressure was unbelievable as first his ankle, then his knee, and then his hip went under. He felt the bones in his pelvis crunching and breaking as his other leg was forced into an unnatural split. It would be good to tell you that Carlos Garcia had a quick death from that point, that he felt no pain as his body was wrenched down into the earth. But no, he died very slowly, in a tremendous amount of fear and pain, as his lungs steadily filled up with earth, and his bones splintered and crunched one by one. One of the most admirable traits of the human race has always been our ability to find a home anywhere. From the Inuit people living in the Arctic Circle, all the way through to the ancient Egyptians building colossal pyramids in the middle of arid deserts, humanity always finds a way to make a home. Anthropologists can look all over the world and find traces of human settlements virtually anywhere. One of the remaining bastions where tribal populations can still exist and flourish is the Amazon rainforest. Life can be difficult and fiercely competitive, but the rich, fertile ground and abundance of food sources have meant that the Amazon has always been home to small human settlements. That is why researchers were so perplexed by the existence of a dark spot within the rainforest. After decades of work, not one trace of human life has been found within this area. For good reason. For a very good reason. Foundation agent Natalie Richards made her way quickly down the stairs, spiraling downwards and downwards. She had never much enjoyed the descent. Something about waking up in the morning and knowing that she would wind up back down here again went beyond the usual Monday blues. It was more insidious. She had barely slept all week. It wasn't just the sticky heat of the barracks at the Paragon South America Forward Operating Site that kept her awake. It was the paranoia. She would just lie there in her bed, experiencing these delusions that at any point, a root would shoot up out of the ground and wrap itself around her neck. It never happened, of course. Their accommodations had been built high up, suspended among the trees away from the site to mitigate any risk. But still, it would always get worse when it was her turn on the observation deck. Down and down she descended through the tower, feeling that horrible, pressurizing feeling that tells you you're going further underground. The air she was breathing down here was filtered by enormous top-of-the-line systems that made sure the air within the tower was clean and fresh. There was an entire department dedicated to the filtration system set up in each of the 4 towers. And yet, she couldn't help imagining that tendrils of fog creeping through the vents to get to her. Suddenly, she was there on the observation deck. She hadn't had time to brace herself, so the view, even though she had seen it dozens of times before, punched her right in the stomach and left her feeling dizzy. On the other side of the glass was a void. The research team had told her that it was 53 kilometers across at its widest point and 42 kilometers at its deepest. Those kinds of numbers meant nothing to her. The reality was that it was darkness, a rotten abyss, open and unending. She was in Tower Charlie, one of 4 observation towers suspended upside down from the roof of the cavern. At the bottom of the tower, what usually would have been the top, was the searchlight. Its beam cut steadily through the abyss like a lighthouse in the dead of night. The beam drifted through empty space. The only way you could even tell it was lit up was the slight haze in the air. Suddenly, the searchlight found its target. Just a branch at first, nothing thicker than a car, snaking its way to join with another and another, growing thicker by multitudes each time, until suddenly the light was shining on the trunk, 380 meters in diameter, 9.2 kilometers tall. The colossal tree hung upside down from the roof of the void, dangling into the abyss. Natalie Richards gulped and tried to breathe deeply so as not to lose her balance. It was her job now to stare at this tree for the next 3 hours. She felt sick. SCP-6666 is a colossal botanical entity that can be found near the coordinates 4 degrees 51 minutes 29.4 seconds south by 67 degrees 44 minutes 12.6 seconds west in the Amazon rainforest. Research has been ongoing for several years to fully map and understand the scale of both the tree itself and the void in which it inhabits. Project Paragon was instituted in an attempt to understand and one day contain the growth of this entity. Above ground, an exclusion zone has been set up covering the area where the roots of this tree have grown through to the surface. A 1-kilometer buffer has been established just outside of the circumference, with a heavily armed security presence patrolling it at all times. Unfortunately, due to the nature of SCP-6666, this buffer zone has to be moved on a normal weekly basis. While samples taken from this SCP seem to indicate that it is totally dead, organically speaking, the root system still possesses a degree of autonomy, being able to move and grow at rates unseen in typical plant species. The roots are capable of breaking through the surface and constricting organic life living above, primarily targeting humans, but also targeting buildings, vehicles, and machinery. It is no wonder then that there is no trace of any human settlements, either contemporary or historical, anywhere near SCP-6666. She knew that the Foundation has been at a loss for progress over the prior few months. Their equipment and resources were deteriorating faster than they were making progress with their research. No one had been down to the floor yet. They were all too afraid to. Descending down through the void, Agent Richard saw something that made her heart drop. Out of the gap in the trunk of SCP-6666 emerged a hand. It clung to the bark with enormous fingers, straining and pulling as the entity dragged itself out from its hiding place. Arm after arm emerged, with one carrying a spear that must have been 20 meters long. 5 arms in total clung to the tree as SCP-6666-A surveyed the vehicle flying past it. The entity didn't swipe at the VTOL. It didn't do anything to attack it, but but it just watched before slowly turning its face towards Agent Richards in the observation tower. It had 6 eyes arranged into columns running down the length of its face. It had no nose, no mouth, and no ears, but it saw her. It saw her even better than she could see it. She felt panic rising in her chest. Meanwhile, the research team and the VTOL checked their equipment one more time. They had been outfitted with a brand new set of custom pressurized insertion suits, but they weren't stupid. Nothing was 100% safe from reach, and having studied the fog down here for month after month, they knew just how deadly it could be if there was even the slightest contamination. Down and down, the craft descended kilometer after kilometer through utter blackness, until through the front window, they were able to see a thick layer of fog coating the basement of the cabin. The lead researcher stood at the front of the VTOL and gave them one more briefing, emphasizing the importance of moving slowly and safely, not touching anything that could compromise the integrity of their suits, and making sure to collect as many physical samples as possible to take back up to the surface for study. Agent Richards stared at the demon in front of her. Even through the very enforced glass, she could hear the low rumbling of its voice as it spoke to her. Researchers have been trying to understand what language it was for years now, but with no luck. It was either so ancient or so alien that it was beyond their ability to translate. The entity had a name, however. From speaking to researchers on Project Paragon adjacent to SCP-4840, they have been able to name the creature, the Demon Hector, one of 4 primeval entities originating from a long-since lost near-human civilization, millions of years old at least. Who knows? It may even predate the existence of Earth entirely. Of course, we can't simply mention the concept of 4 primeval demons without telling you a little bit about the other 3, some of which you might even recognize. One of them, known as SCP-2254 to the SCP Foundation, is also known as the Demon Lahire. Much like Hector, Lahire is a 6-eyed being of immense power, presiding over his own domain. He is invisible to the naked eye and spends his free time influencing the minds of human beings, when he's not impregnating them with fleshy masses. Next comes the entity known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-4840-B, also known as the Demon Lancelot. Once a brave knight of King Cyrus VIII von Apollyon before being corrupted, this immensely powerful being resides in SCP-4840, the flying city of Autopopodopolis. And rounding out this elite group of mysterious demonic entities comes SCP-6765-D, also known as the Demon Ogier, a horrific cloaked entity that sits atop a throne of blood. It's widely believed these 4 entities were cursed by an unknown and immensely powerful thaumatological being long ago, doomed to hide in ancient places and live until they fulfill their true purpose, playing a part in some known event that will someday compromise all of mankind. And now, Agent Richards was face to face with 1/4 of the apocalypse. Agent Richards stared as the Demon Hector spoke to her. Dozens of kilometers below, the VTOL touched down in the fog. As soon as the deployment doors opened, the thick gas filled the aircraft, obscuring their vision. Turning on their helmet cameras, the researchers stepped out into the unknown as their live feeds were watched by their colleagues on the surface. Smooth stone surfaces covered with etchings swam into view. Some kind of ancient language carved into stone? The remnants of some early South American civilization? No, the researchers on the surface knew immediately that what they were looking at was far too advanced, far too old. Was it? Was it even human at all? A scream filled the control room. A breach in a researcher's suit. The fog that he breathed in contained just a few particles, set the neurons in his brain on fire before shutting down his nervous system entirely in a matter of seconds. The rest of the researchers all ran back to the VTOL in fear, but the fog around them was so dense that they couldn't find it anywhere. It could have been 3 feet away from them, and they would have never even known. One by one, the researchers in the foggy forest dropped dead. On the surface, the research team sighed and closed the video feeds. There was a reason they'd sent them down with live cameras. No one had really expected them to return. And all the while, Agent Natalie Richards stood trembling and watching as the Demon Hector hung from the upside-down tree and chanted at her in his impossible language. She didn't care what any of the botanists said. This tree was not dead. The demon readied its spear, and leaped at her. On an ordinary day in 1991, a young man known by the initials JS went on a hike with 4 of his friends on the wooded outskirts of their small town. Everything seemed perfectly normal until JS began to feel a strange sense of familiarity, like he had been in this spot before. He couldn't shake this weird feeling, but thought nothing more of it. Little did he know that this was a sign of deadly things to come. Several hours after first experiencing that sense of deja vu, JS was found by the side of the road, covered in cuts and scratches, with his friends nowhere to be found. This is the story of SCP-939, an unforgettable monster that you'll never remember. There was no way for JS to know that the unsettling feeling he felt and the horrors that followed it were the result of an experiment conducted by the SCP Foundation, an experiment with deadly unforeseen consequences. JS and his friends were exposed to a substance known only as AMN-C227 as part of a series of tests performed by the SCP Foundation, intended to determine the effectiveness of this substance as a deliberate amnestic. Dealing with as many mysterious, secret creatures and objects as they do, the SCP Foundation has long needed a way to tamper with the memories of those exposed to the Foundation's various prisoners and test subjects. And when the Foundation discovered AMN-C227, it seemed like it might be perfect for this purpose. So where did AMN-C227 come from? Over a year before the incident with JS and his friends, the SCP Foundation captured SCP-939. SCP-939 is a species of endothermic predators that live and hunt in packs. They are designated Keter class and regarded as highly dangerous and hostile to human life. Native to caves, they have no eyes, translucent red skin, and stand at an average of 2.2 meters tall, with an average weight of 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending in 3 fingered claws and a 4th opposable digit resembling a thumb. In addition to their sharp claws, their mouths are filled with red fang-like teeth that reach up to 6 centimeters in length. In place of their absent eyes, they have light-sensitive spots running along their backs, which are covered in spines believed to detect changes in air pressure and flow. In addition to their many other terrifying attributes, the internal anatomy of SCP-939 poses a biological mystery. These creatures have no circulatory system and no digestive tract. That's right, in spite of being predators seemingly acting on a need to feed, they have no stomach. Instead, when they eat, their food builds up in their respiratory system until its presence inhibits function, and then it is regurgitated. In spite of being a creature that should not, under any logical conditions, be able to live, SCP-939 continues to persist, and is even capable of giving birth to live young after a gestation period of 12 months. The SCP Foundation was able to study a litter of these young that were born in captivity in September of 1992, though the creatures remain just as much of a scientific mystery as they were upon first discovery. Everything about them seems to defy the logic of the natural world, which, to be fair, is really nothing new for the Foundation. The respiratory system of SCP-939 was found to exhale small traces of an airborne amnestic substance, given the name AMN-C227. This compound blocks the formation of memories for the duration of exposure to it, plus a 30-minute period following the exposure, give or take a few minutes. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and completely undetectable in the bloodstream after only 60 minutes. AMN-C227 was approved for use as a Class C amnestic by the SCP Foundation in 1990, following some initial tests. However, after one particular incident involving a young man and his friends, the official use of AMN-C227 was suspended. JS and 3 of his 4 friends were previously given a dose of AMN-C227, though the details of why they were given the amnestic has since been stricken from the record. Several months after being exposed to AMN-C227, JS and his friends went out on their ill-fated hiking trip. While hiking, JS was suddenly overcome with a sense of deja vu. When he mentioned it to his friends, 3 of them agreed that they had felt it too. One of the group, another young man who had not been exposed to AMN-C227, was uncomfortable and decided to go home. JS and the remaining 3 members of the group made the choice to stay in the woods and try to determine what was triggering the unusual feeling of familiarity. As they got closer and closer to a large cave near the hiking trail, the sense of having been there before grew stronger and stronger. Armed with only one flashlight and a foolish curiosity, the 4 went inside the cave. They made their way deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness, not knowing why they felt this way or what they might find inside. None of the group could explain just what felt so familiar, only that the further they made their way into the cave, the more pronounced the feeling became. It was getting late, and they knew they should have been afraid to venture so deep into a cave with only one light source and no knowledge of what lay inside. But still, they pressed on. One of the group remarked that they should turn back, but the others refused to listen. They wanted to know what they were getting close to, what was drawing them deeper and deeper into the cave. Unfortunately for them, they would get their answer. In the heart of the cave was a pack of SCP-939, waiting patiently for their prey to wander into their domain. There are no witnesses to account for what exactly happened to JS and his companions, but we can reasonably piece the events together from what happened after. Once the friends reached the heart of the cave, the creatures were on them in seconds, raking them with their sharp claws and biting with their fangs. SCP-939 are larger and stronger than most people, so it was probably not much of a fight. However, while his friends were being devoured, JS was somehow able to scramble out of the cave and make his way into the woods in search of help. Under the influence of the AMC-227 that had built up in the cave from the presence of the pack of SCP-939, JS lost a large portion of his memory of the event. He found himself on the side of the highway late at night, seriously injured and his clothes ripped. An officer found him there and asked him to stay still and remain calm until an ambulance could arrive. JS was still in a panic and attempted to run away from the officer, begging to be released so that he could get away. He babbled incoherently about the color red, screaming over and over again about the red, though when prompted, he could not explain what the red he was screaming about referred to. His friends were not with him. Just as the officer managed to calm JS, the ambulance arrived. Its flashing red lights sent him into another frenzy, and he attempted to escape custody, claiming that the red lights were going to get him. The official police report described JS as perhaps being under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen, that he was just having a bad trip, but the SCP Foundation knew better. The Foundation conducted an interview with JS about his experience, and determined that SCP-939 was certainly involved. As part of their cover-up effort, they strongly implicated JS in the disappearance and the death of his friends. He was convicted of manslaughter, though the bodies of his friends were never found. It is rumored that the SCP Foundation hired him on a prison work release program, and that he now works as a member of the janitorial staff at one of the Foundation's facilities. This incident led to the suspension of the use of AMN-C227, as it revealed some vital and disturbing information about the compound's side effects. After the exposure to AMN-C227, a person who found themselves exposed to it again would experience a sense of familiarity and felt compelled to investigate the source of this feeling. Essentially, anyone treated with AMN-C227 are not made aware of the existence and danger of SCP-939 would become a perfect victim, primed to be attracted to dens of SCP-939. It is likely that this side effect is not a coincidence, but rather a deliberate hunting tactic designed to attract prey that had somehow managed to escape. With no memory of their attack at the hands of SCP-939, this previous intended prey would find themselves drawn to the same den or even a new one, not knowing that they were walking back into near certain death. While the SCP Foundation suspended the use of AMN-C227 as a Class C amnestic, they did recruit a team of SCP field operatives to take advantage of this side effect. This team of operatives were deliberately administered a dose of AMN-C227 and briefed on its effects, as well as the dangers of following the feeling of déjà vu should it surface in the field. These infected officers were essentially used as bloodhounds, relying on any sense of unusual familiarity to sniff out new dens of SCP-939 so they could be captured and contained by the Foundation. As far as we know, this operation is still ongoing today. However, now that the Foundation has a sufficient number of specimens to study, additional dens of SCP-939 that are discovered are ordered to be immediately destroyed. As for the SCP-939 still in captivity, they are contained in environmentally regulated and negatively pressured cells with walls of reinforced concrete. The doors to the cells are airtight to prevent the leakage of any AMN-C227. And any personnel that interact with one of the creatures is required to wear level C hazmat gear to avoid exposure and follow decontamination procedures upon exiting the cell. All SCP-939 have subdermal tracking devices implanted to find them in the event of escape. Only one SCP-939 has given birth in the time that the creatures have been in captivity. Strangely, SCP-939 young look indistinguishable from human infants and change their physical appearance at some yet unknown point as they age. If any more offspring are produced, they will immediately be separated from the parent and studied. All that we know is that they are found in caves in the woods outside of a small town. It could be any town, even yours. So, if you're ever out hiking and struck with a sudden feeling of déjà vu, don't investigate. Don't get curious. Just go home. It might just save your life. In a remote part of Russia, a mysterious disease outbreak was tearing through a tiny farming village with terrifying side effects. There was no cure, no clue to where it came from, and worst of all, the disease's terrifying impact didn't end with death. No, it was after those carrying the disease died that the real horrors started. After an agonizing fever that leaves the victims writhing in pain, they quickly succumb to the disease, only to rise from their graves to wreak havoc on the living. The virus continues to spread until the corpses outnumber those trying to hide from them, as the world spirals into almost certain ruin. It sounds like the plot of a zombie movie, but for the SCP Foundation, this is anything but fiction. And the terror that unfolded in that little Siberian town is the first recorded encounter with SCP-610. Also known as the flesh that hates. First, livestock began to vanish from farms. Theft or wild animals were suspected, but no suspects could be found, and no mutilated remains turned up. The animals weren't being stolen, and they weren't being eaten, so what happened to them? With no more animals left to lose, the farmers themselves then began to disappear. But the authorities refused to take the missing persons cases seriously. The missing farmers' families would contact the police, make a report, and then the whole thing was forgotten. It was written off just as another unsolved disappearance, which wasn't uncommon in the wild and unforgiving region. Then, the police themselves began to disappear. The families of the missing farmers would sometimes report strange sounds from the surrounding woods, describing moans and inhuman screeches of pain. One young boy reported seeing a cow with what he described as tentacles lurking around the edge of the trees. Regional police were dispatched to the location and ordered to investigate and report back on their findings within 24 hours. But the units sent to the area didn't report back and were never heard from again. Upon learning of the reports, the Russian government grew increasingly concerned, fearing domestic insurgency or foreign espionage of some kind could be at play. They sent a small team of special agents to the area, and one by one, those agents disappeared, just like the others before them. It seemed no one who went into the village after the disappearances started ever came out again. They had all simply vanished. Desperate for answers, the Russian government contacted the only people in the world who could help, the SCP Foundation. What the Foundation found over the course of their investigation would shock and unnerve them, going beyond anything they had previously discovered. Before the investigation officially began, the affected area was sealed off by the Russian government. Not knowing if it would be safe to send researchers into the containment perimeter, the Foundation set up a small camera-mounted unit, nicknamed Herbie, to capture footage of whatever remained of the village. The images captured by Herbie revealed what exactly had become of the people in this doomed village, and the true nightmarish nature of SCP-610. SCP-610 is a Keter-class entity, meaning it's an anomaly that's exceedingly difficult to contain consistently or reliably, with containment procedures often being extensive and complex. 610 is a highly contagious skin disease that initially manifests like an ordinary allergic reaction, with symptoms including increased sensitivity, itching, and a rash. But within just 3 hours of those initial symptoms appearing, the rash starts to turn into masses of scar tissue on the chest and arms. These masses spread over the legs and back of the victim and completely consume them in thick, rubbery flesh within 5 hours. Once they're covered, the victim will cease all vital functions. Unfortunately for them, and doubly so for those around them, they do not stay dead. About 3 minutes after expiring, the victim's vitals will restart at a heightened rate, and the masses of flesh encasing their body will begin to move and multiply, mutating them into a form beyond anything resembling the human they once were. The specific type of mutation varies from case to case, but has included the head becoming massive and bulbous, the growth of extra limbs, and, in especially gruesome cases, the victim's body splitting apart to allow extra tendrils of flesh to sprout from the open wound. Occasionally, an infected person will stop moving and become rooted to the ground in a set location. Once it is settled, their flesh will spread itself across the ground, encasing all nearby objects in flaps of scar tissue. The infected that maintain their mobility are highly aggressive, even violent, and will attempt to infect any living thing that comes into their line of sight. The disease does not only infect humans, and can take over any living organism within a matter of hours. Due to the highly contagious and dangerous nature of the disease, safe observation of infected specimens and areas is only possible with drones and mounted cameras. This brings us back to Herbie, the first such mounted camera to record footage of the infected area. Herbie was deployed to an infection site, also known as Site A, without any damage. It remained at the outside perimeter of the village for 2 hours, observing several infected humans and fire damage to many of the homes, before following an infected into an intact house. Herbie's camera feed captured the infected person entering the house and sitting down at the table inside. There were several other infected humans in the house, and one unidentified infected creature that remained immobile under the table. After viciously assaulting one of the other infected humans, the infected returned to the table and began to lay out plates on top of it. Pieces of its flesh began to wriggle and tear away from its body, before settling onto each plate. Once the plates were filled, the infected sitting at the table began to grab at the flesh and crush it into their mouths, in a perverse imitation of a normal mealtime gathering. After capturing this stomach-churning display, Herbie left the house and continued to explore the village. It recorded footage of a large stack of bodies that seemed to be made up of both Russian military and civilians, with an infected sitting on top. As Herbie maneuvered towards the remains of the town hall, an infected grabbed the rover off the ground. Herbie's camera was able to capture the face of the infected that grabbed the rover. The face was that of a young girl around 10 years old, strangely intact atop a large, distorted body. The final moments of Herbie's camera feed captured the infected girl's face bursting open, revealing tendrils of flesh that pulled Herbie into the gaping maw. Then, the feed cut to black. Herbie was regarded as lost, but the video feed briefly resumed 5 hours later, showing the camera covered with an unidentified slime. After this, the video feed was cut for good, and Herbie abandoned in Site A. The Foundation has sent several manned expeditions into Site A, where many expedition forces have fallen victim to the infected. Several operatives were also lost in an earthquake that revealed a network of underground tunnels. A manned expedition into these tunnels was attempted, and the video feed that was captured by the researchers on the expedition was deeply disturbing. There were images of an abandoned church filled with infected, and a mass of uninfected or partially infected human captives. The final moments of the video feed from this expedition captured several operatives being murdered by an infected human wielding a farming scythe, indicating that the infected are capable of using simple weaponry in addition to brute force. The use of this weapon, paired with the presence of captives in the underground tunnels, paints a terrifying picture of the kind of organization the infected are capable of. No more manned expeditions have been attempted, or if they have been highly classified. Ordinarily, once a new SCP is discovered, it is placed in containment at the Foundation, with special procedures in place so that it can be studied or even neutralized in the rare occasions where it's deemed necessary. When it comes to SCP-610 though, containment might just be impossible. It simply covers too much area and is too dangerous to expose to human researchers. Instead, all infected areas have been isolated with the permission of the Russian government. There is an official perimeter established around these areas, and any civilians that approach them are told to leave under the pretense of ongoing military operations. For once, a top-secret military project is the more innocent answer. Armed guards are placed at the perimeter of every infected area, and any living thing with symptoms of SCP-610 spotted near the perimeter is to be immobilized, killed, and burned from as far away as possible. Any living thing that comes in contact with SCP-610, whether a soldier, a scientist, or a civilian, is immediately terminated and their remains destroyed. If someone comes within 3 meters of an infected organism, they will be quarantined and remotely examined to determine if they have been infected. While the spread of SCP-610 can be airborne, it has been determined to be far less contagious when spread through air particles as opposed to physical contact. The infection sites remain active to this day, like modern-day leper colonies, though they are isolated from the general population, and the military is doing everything in their power to contain the infected. SCP-610 is still very much alive. It is rare for an entity to exist that the Foundation cannot truly contain, but can only try to guard against, and that makes this infection all the more terrifying. Who knows how much it has mutated over the years, growing, spreading, hungry for new hosts. There is still so much that the Foundation does not know about the flesh that hates, such as how it works, what it can do, or even where it came from, since the origin of the first infection is still, at this point, entirely unknown. It has shown itself to be capable of learning, planning, and protecting itself. So who is to say that it couldn't figure out a way to escape from its isolated area? It is so highly contagious and spreads so quickly that just one tiny infected rabbit and one inattentive soldier could be enough for SCP-610 to reach the general population. If it did, its violent, destructive nature and hatred for all life would mean that everything, not just the people, but animals, plants, and the world itself, could be at risk. And no one is ready for this kind of infection, a disease that turns the human body against itself, turns our skin into a weapon and a tomb, stripping away identity, humanity, and everything that isn't made of the same hateful flesh. So let's hope that the perimeter holds. And the next time you feel a little itchy, try not to think about what might happen next. It was late October of 1993, and John Matthews of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina had just scored a date with Sarah, one of the most popular girls in school, and he had planned the perfect night out for the two of them. A haunted house had just been set up in town, and he, like many guys before him, figured he could use that as a chance to impress his date. He'd already been through the attraction, so he knew exactly when to put his arm around Sarah when one of the costume actors or animatronics tried to spook them. If any of them got too close for comfort, he might even punch them, just to show Sarah how brave he was. That would be a surefire way to impress any girl. However, John had no idea of the real horror that waited for him and his date through the doors of this seemingly normal funhouse. At first, the haunted house went as normal. John laughed at all the fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons, making sure Sarah knew how dumb he thought they looked. He shoved away actors dressed as axe murderers and told them to stay away from his date. It was dark, so they couldn't really see each other's faces, but John guessed that Sarah was probably really impressed. All in all, the date was going well, until they got to a room that John hadn't seen the first time he'd been through. It seemed like it had been added overnight, but at the same time it didn't mesh with the theme. The theme of the haunted house this year was Cannibal Hotel, but this room looked more like Dracula's castle, complete with actors dressed as Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and Dracula himself. One of them was even a dead ringer for the actor Vincent Price. John and Sarah watched, confused, as the actors performed their routines which, just like their surroundings, seemed out of place. It was total hackneyed, full of lame puns and very basic scares, though the special effects were undeniably impressive. When John and Sarah walked through the room, the actor dressed as Dracula stood in front of John and started pretending to hypnotize him. Up close, he did look a lot like Bela Lugosi, the actor who'd portrayed the Count during his first big screen appearance. This definitely threw John off a little, but unfortunately, this Dracula didn't have Lugosi's acting talents. "You are under my control," Dracula said, waving his fingers at John and staring at him. John, getting really sick of this, pushed the guy out of the way to move on to the next room. But when he did, he felt that something was really wrong here. He practically dragged Sarah away from watching the Wolfman transform and ran the rest of the way through the house, all of his bravado now gone. Sarah asked her date what was wrong, and he didn't tell her. How could he without sounding crazy? When he had touched that actor playing Dracula, something hadn't felt right. Even through his suit and cape, John had been able to tell that something was wrong. He was cold and rigid, not like a human being, but like a robot or a wax dummy. This is just one of multiple complaints from Halloween attractions around the United States that prompted the action of the SCP Foundation. Several witnesses described either seeing people that resembled classic movie monsters, or living wax models of those monsters appearing in various haunted houses, corn mazes, carnivals, and strip malls across the country. The Foundation has designated this troupe of hammy wax actors SCP-4153. During performances, SCP-4153 use wax to alter their appearance, produce props, including fake blood and gore, and even manipulate wax objects from afar. While this results in some uncanny special effects, the content of the performances tend to be pretty standard classic haunted house fare. They mostly do things like reenacting scenes from classic horror films and telling spooky jokes, with a little fake blood here and there. When the Foundation arrived at the Myrtle Beach attraction, they apprehended the various wax characters and determined that their eerie resemblance to the classic horror characters wasn't just makeup. After the horror some of these Foundation employees had seen on the job, living wax models of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula seemed almost cute in comparison, and the troupe of wax actors were taken to Site 9 for questioning and containment. The first member of the troupe to be interviewed on site was Dracula, dubbed SCP-4153-017 by the Foundation. He was interviewed by Agent Timothy West, who was totally unimpressed with Dracula's shtick. He tried to hypnotize Agent West, an act which he flatly refused to indulge in. Dracula provided the agent with seemingly no useful information, only responding to questions with cliches like, "We were all dead the whole time," and "The log was coming from inside the house." The next wax figure to be interrogated was Frankenstein's monster, aka SCP-4153-015, who was interviewed by Agent Samantha Henwick. Much like how SCP-4153-017 stayed fully in character as Dracula during his interview, SCP-4153-015 seemed to really believe that he was actor Boris Karloff, who played Frankenstein's monster in the 1930s. The SCP spoke in an exact imitation of Karloff's voice and speech patterns, and talked to Agent Henwick as if she was another actor on a movie set. He talked about how honored he was to be part of the project, and asked, "Are we rolling?" when he noticed the conversation was being recorded. Agent Henwick responded to the SCP's comments with confusion, a fact which he took to mean that she was staying in character. Like a true actor, he took a moment to prepare himself before pulling his own head off, much to the horror of Agent Henwick. The last and probably most interesting of the interviews conducted in 1993 was with the wax figure who resembled Vincent Price. More specifically, Vincent Price in his role as Henry Jared in 1953's House of Wax, a movie about a mad sculptor who made wax figures out of the corpses of his victims. This wax figure was designated SCP-4153-036 and was interviewed by Agent Gerald Penn. Penn started the interview with a simple question: "Why do you try to frighten people?" SCP-4153-036 had an equally simple answer: "Why does anyone try to frighten? It's fun to be frightened, almost as much fun as it is to do the frightening." Penn was skeptical, pointing out that the wax figure's act wasn't especially frightening. The SCP laughed dismissively, telling Penn to have some respect for the classics. Penn was still not having any of it. He had been with the SCP Foundation for 20 years at this point, and he'd seen enough real horror that the so-called classics had no effect on him whatsoever. He pressured Price for answers, but instead of responding with a straight answer, Price launched into a speech about his feelings on monsters. He said, "You'll call any oaf with a steak knife hunting gaggles of teens a monster these days. There's no wit, no humor, no charm. Where's the passion, the artisanship? Where's the sense of theater? Would you like to know something peculiar? I've almost never played a monster. Or I've played villains, most certainly, but not monsters. Only men besieged by fate, driven to revenge. Still, I've always had a fondness for them. Even as a child, I sympathized more with the monster than the hero." Agent Penn, who, at this point, was really getting tired of all the theatrics, started to interject. But when he opened his mouth to speak, he was only able to get a few words out before his tongue went numb and rigid in his mouth. He could no longer move it. Agent Penn tried to speak, but his tongue was too solid and heavy to do anything more than knock uselessly against his bottom teeth. He felt something dislodge inside his mouth, and he hoped maybe it was the feeling of his tongue being freed from whatever spell the SCP had put it under. But then he started to feel a tearing and a sticky heaviness in his bottom jaw. Agent Penn reached up and felt around inside his mouth. He started to scream indistinctly when he realized to his horror that his tongue had ripped off. He pulled it out of his mouth, and when he held it in his hand, his fears were confirmed. Somehow it had become nothing more than a lump of pink wax. Now completely tongueless, Agent Penn continued to babble frantically, no doubt trying to curse at the wax creature sitting in front of him. SCP-4153-036 finally paid attention to his interviewer's distress at this point. He turned to Agent Penn with a look of disapproval and disappointment and said, "Oh dear, your tongue seems to have gotten away from you there. Here, allow me." The SCP leaned towards Agent Penn, and though the agent wanted to resist, he found that he could no longer move his arms. In fact, his whole body had gone numb and rigid, just like the wax tongue. The only movement he was capable of was opening his mouth, and the wax facsimile of Vincent Price started molding his tongue back to the proper shape, and reattached it inside Agent Penn's mouth. Agent Penn whimpered, unable to do anything while the SCP's hands were in his mouth. The creature said, "Hush now, I warned you about this. I told you that you mustn't disturb the wax before it hardens. That is a crucial part of the process. It needs to solidify. Otherwise, you risk disturbing the performance." By the time his tongue was reattached and resealed, Agent Penn was on the verge of tears. He gurgled, gasping for air, wiggling his tongue around in his mouth to make sure that it worked. The SCP returned to his seat, pleased with his own handiwork. "Splendid, splendid, good as new. Now, let's take it from the top, shall we?" Agent Penn took a deep breath, steadying himself as SCP-4153-036 whispered the word, "Action." Penn resumed the interview with the same simple question. Why do you try to frighten people? SCP-4153-036 gave the same simple answer. Why does anyone try to frighten? It's fun to be frightened. Almost as much fun as it is to do the frightening. The interview continued for only a few minutes longer, with both parties repeating only things they'd said earlier in the recording. The log ends with SCP-4153-036 once again saying, "Have some respect for the classics." Not long after the interview concluded, Foundation management completely lost contact with Site-9. A mobile task force was sent in to investigate the cause of this loss of contact, and on arrival, they found a catastrophic containment breach. Not a single member of on-site personnel was found alive, and strangely, all of their bodies seemed to be coated in wax. Further examination revealed that this initial observation wasn't the case at all. They weren't just coated in wax. No, every member of the Site-9 team had all of their major organs, including their skin, surgically extracted and replaced with sculpted wax. Of course, this was assumed to be the doing of SCP-4153, but oddly, all of the autopsies suggested that the removal of organs had happened weeks before the apprehension of SCP-4153, even though all of the on-site personnel had seemed alive and well right up until the containment breach. Outside of being replaced by wax, no damage was done to the bodies. It seemed that everyone had just dropped dead at the same time. There was one body that was different though, that of Agent Gerald Penn. Agent Penn's decapitated body was found in the same containment cell that had been used for SCP-4153-036. Next to the body was a photograph showing SCP-4153-036 holding up Agent Penn's screaming head, and on the back, a single sentence was written. "From one horror aficionado to another, always stay ahead." All of the SCP-4153 instances remain unaccounted for, and MTF Iota-10, also known as the Damn Feds, continue to monitor for new sightings and reports of activity that may be linked to the Wax Troop. Hopefully one day, they'll be taken into Foundation custody and contained, and maybe all it will take is for them to meet someone with a sufficient appreciation for the classics. It was the summer of 2012 in Damascus, and for the people of Syria, it certainly seemed like all the predictions about the end of the world were coming true. The Syrian civil war was raging between multiple rebel groups, and the dictator Bashar al-Assad, whose government was shelling its own people, as well as using chemical weapons and brutal campaigns of violence across the country in hopes of quelling the rebellion. Little did they know, amidst all this pain and bloodshed, something even more dangerous was brewing. An anomalous phenomenon in the sunny plains north of Damascus that may pose a threat to all of humanity someday. A threat known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3989, the Bone Orchard. This temporal and spatial anomaly was discovered a few years earlier in 2009, before the Syrian civil war even officially began. It's strange for a highly dangerous Keter-class anomaly to be discovered under such seemingly mundane circumstances. The SCP Foundation first became aware of SCP-3989 after a small olive orchard owner sold a strangely high amount of olives that shouldn't have been possible when compared to his reported number of Olea europaea olive trees. Field agents were dispatched to question the owner about his sudden success, but he was resistant to questioning. The agents began a covert surveillance operation to figure out what was actually going on here, at which point they discovered a considerable spatial anomaly. The olive orchard was far bigger on the inside. The property was seized by the Foundation for containment. The owner had no real knowledge of the spatial anomaly. It's likely he just decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth while making money hand over fist from the extra olives he sold. The owner was given amnestics and a new life, as the Foundation began to study this anomaly, which was now labeled SCP-3989. To this day, no researcher has been able to figure out the origin of 3989's anomalous qualities. It was first given a Euclid-class designation and cordoned off from the public with a simple chain-link fence, while Foundation investigations were underway on the inside. On a map, the plot of land the olive farm should occupy is about 5 square acres, but this plot contains an unseen portal to a pocket dimension within its 12-meter active zone, which doesn't follow the same spatial laws that our reality does. This subdimension, known as SCP-3989-A, is a hotbed of fascinating anomalous activity. Upon discovery of this hot zone, the Foundation established the nearby Area 126 as a research center and a makeshift containment facility for any anomalous entities captured from SCP-3989-A. It seemed like the Foundation really had a handle on this situation, but they were blissfully unaware of the true horrors lurking within SCP-3989-A. But they'd soon find out, in the most horrifying way possible. Dr. Farrah Ghazelli was assigned to head the research into the anomalous zone within 3989, and naturally, he began organizing fact-finding expeditions into the heart of the affected area. The first guinea pig to head into the hot zone was former Foundation agent Hosea Herrick, who'd been demoted to the lowly D-class position of D-126-15 due to failures on a previous mission. With a remote link to Dr. Ghazelli, Herrick was forced to venture into the active anomalous zone to collect footage and samples of the flora and fauna within. The first thing Herrick noticed on his expedition was the strange quality of the olive trees within the active zone. The bark was a stark white, and the leaves a bloody red. Up close, Herrick could see that the trunks and branches of the trees had undergone a process known as ossification, where the material slowly becomes bone or bone-like tissue. Hence the anomaly's creepy name, the Bone Orchard. These ossified trees became known as SCP-3989-1. Herrick also made another discovery. All over the trees and ground were worm-like creatures that looked like long maggots that the Foundation dubbed SCP-3989-1A. Agent Herrick then noticed something was off about the leaves of the ossified trees. They were beating. He looked closer and they appeared to be heart tissue filled with pumping veins. Dr. Ghazelli ordered Herrick to take a branch for testing, and when he did, the tree began to bleed. When he looked down, he saw that the worm-like creatures that covered the ground were now crawling up his legs. Ignoring orders from Dr. Ghazelli, Herrick fled from the active zone in terror. As he left, Dr. Ghazelli caught something in the corner of Herrick's body cam footage, a long white hind limb disappearing behind a tree. Back in our normal dimension, tests on the sample Herrick collected yielded more upsetting discoveries. Genetically, the trees were identical to humans, the trunks were human bone, and the leaves really were made of human heart tissue. Fascinated and just a little bit horrified, Dr. Ghazelli authorized further expeditions into 3989-A. This time, though, Agent Herrick would be accompanied by another D-class, and both would be armed with handguns and protective body armor. As it would turn out, this expedition would be even more horrifying than the first. As the two D-classes explored the active zones to collect further samples, they found that the worms were responsible for the ossification of the otherwise non-anomalous olive trees. They consumed the wood little by little and deposited human bone matter in return. Herrick and his companion also noticed that these trees were beginning to bear fruit. Dr. Ghazelli ordered Herrick to collect some of this fruit for testing, but when they attempted to remove the fruit, it burst, releasing more worm creatures. It seemed that the converted trees acted as incubators for their egg sacs. Before the duo could return with the samples they were able to take, the creature that had been spotted on Herrick's body cam during the first mission finally appeared. It was huge, with long white limbs, and no facial features except for a huge mouth. It grabbed Herrick's companion and literally ate the top half of his body in a single bite, before dropping his legs to the ground. This horrifying beast, and the many others like it, would later be designated as SCP-3989-2A. Herrick pulled out his sidearm and shot the creature several times. The creature ignored the bullets though, and charged Herrick. The feed from his body cam cut out soon after. Both men were declared killed in action, and in recognition of his sacrifice, Josiah Herrick was posthumously reinstated to his old position in the Foundation. Job well done, Agent. Dr. Gazzelli, meanwhile, prepared for the next mission. This time knowing of the clear dangers present within the Bone Orchard, Dr. Gazzelli recruited the help of MTF Zeta-9, aka the Mole Rats. 3 members, referred to as Charlie Team, were sent into the anomalous zone, once again remotely directed by Dr. Gazzelli. They were equipped with experimental ultrasound technology, so they could scan the fruit of the trees within 3989-A without breaking any and incurring the wrath of 3989-2A, which seemed to act as sentries for the trees. Early on in their journey, they found the body of Agent Herrick crucified against one of the ossified trees, his skin covered in mysterious symbols that were likely of Sarkic origin. While we don't have time to fully explore Sarkicism, that will require a video explanation all of its own. All you need to know is that it's a dangerous religious cult that worships flesh and disease and has close ties to similar dangerous anomalies, like SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates. People familiar with that SCP will note eerily strange similarities to some of the things the Mole Rats were about to encounter. As Charlie Team explored, they saw a huge number of 3989-2As observing them with eyeless faces from between the ossified trees. They pressed on until they discovered what seemed to be an entirely new kind of tree within the Bone Orchard. SCP-3989-2 were huge trees made out of what appears to be enlarged human spines in place of a trunk. The smaller twigs on the tree were made from heart and lung tissue, and the whole thing was covered in what appeared to be human amniotic sacs. Charlie Team attempted to use their ultrasound scanners to discover the contents of these sacs, but one of them exploded in the process, releasing an entirely new variety of monster. From the sacs emerged the larval stage of SCP-3989-2B, smaller humanoid monsters with no faces, no sensory organs, 2 pelvises, 4 legs, and an exposed spine. Suddenly, Charlie Team could feel a horrifying Sarkic presence around them, which one member of the team described as being like someone grabbing her liver and giggling in her face. As the various monsters of the Bone Orchard began to converge on the team, the voice of the Sarkic prophet of war and the hunt, Oruk, began sounding in their ears. He was beckoning them to join him. While Charlie Team fled from the active zone, Dr. Gazzelli felt increasingly drawn into it. He heard the voice of Oruk, and he liked what he heard. Little by little, the workers of Area 126 were losing their minds, manipulated by the Sarkic power of the Bone Orchard right next to them, day after day. They were no longer loyal to the Foundation. They wanted to serve their new dark masters. The 4th and final expedition was led by Dr. Gazzelli himself. He took a band of loyal followers and one non-believer on a quest into the active zone to find an Orcian temple they believed was hidden in the very heart of the Bone Orchard. Once they were inside, Gazzelli and his loyalists murdered the non-believer as a sacrifice to their new master. They carried on until they eventually found what they were looking for, a giant stone temple resembling an Aztec ziggurat, dubbed SCP-3989-4. There they also encountered a new kind of monster, dubbed SCP-3989-3. These beasts were larger than the others and resembled ancient warriors. They had insect-like exoskeletal armor, horned heads, additional hind and forelimbs, and integrated bladed weapons. What Dr. Gazzelli and his companions thought would be paradise turned out to be a kind of hell as they were led into the temple, where temporal and spatial distortions broke their mind, and the multiple highly aggressive instances of SCP-3989-3, -2A, and -2B broke their bodies. The whole thing had been a horrifying trap. In that moment, back at Area 126, another fleshy, horrifying tree sprouted out of the ground in the middle of the complex. Monsters that had once been Dr. Gazzelli and his followers emerged from its amniotic sacs, and all hell broke loose throughout the complex. Soon enough, the base was crawling with monsters from the Bone Orchard and staff who'd become brainwashed Sarkic cultists working in service of Oruk. Humans were gathered up to be sacrificed to the ever-growing number of anomalous trees. Things came to a head when the anomaly in Area 126 was visited by an outside agent from the Foundation, working on behalf of the Hazardous Materials Containment Liaison. Biological containment specialist Dr. Marshall Grant and his team arrived at the site and were horrified to see the Sarkic nightmare that had unfolded. They quickly engaged in a firefight with the anomalous creatures and Sarkic devotees who'd gained control over Area 126. A number of Dr. Grant's team were lost in the process, but thankfully, they were able to eventually regain control of the base and the anomalous area. After this incident, SCP-3989 was upgraded to Keter class and given a huge upgrade in security, including 4-meter-high concrete walls and a platoon-sized regiment of Mobile Task Force members with heavy weaponry. The force that took over the minds of those exposed was designated SCP-3989-5, a force so powerful that those infected are given the choice to self-terminate or be contained forever. This may seem like a somewhat happy ending to a grim tale, but one detail keeps Dr. Grant and everyone at the Foundation who is forced to deal with 3989 awake at night. According to all recent studies into the Bone Orchard, it isn't contained at all. In fact, the active zone is getting bigger. Nowhere is more secure than an SCP Foundation facility. They make Fort Knox look like a revolving door with a spare key under the mat. That's why when someone or something can infiltrate without even being noticed, it's considered a major threat. And doing exactly that is what put a mysterious group of insurgents known as the Serpent's Hand on the map. But this group of interest isn't just famous for its ability to sneak into Foundation strongholds. Like a lot of the SCP Foundation's biggest threats, from the Scarlet King to the Chaos Insurgency, the roots of the Serpent's Hand are closer than they think. The Foundation's first official brush with the Serpent's Hand came shortly after they contained SCP-268, an Irish tweed wool newsboy cap believed to have been created sometime in the 1800s. The only identifying mark on the cap is a label with the following phrase written in Middle Irish: "The garden is the serpent's place," initially believed to be a reference to the serpent in the biblical Garden of Eden. This Euclid-class SCP is a double-edged sword. It gives the user a useful supernatural ability at a terrifying supernatural cost. Anyone wearing the cap appears so utterly unremarkable that nobody is able to take notice of them, and when they leave a person's general area of awareness, they're quickly forgotten. The user isn't invisible, but they might as well be. If you're a person whose line of work involves sneaking and subterfuge, or if you're just a major introvert, this sounds like a dream come true. However, like a lot of anomalies, this dream can quickly become a nightmare. If someone wears the cap repeatedly, or for too long at one time, they risk the effects of the cap becoming permanent, even when it's removed. You can become a forgotten person, impossible to notice and remember, even to those closest to you. Why anyone would want such a fate is a mystery, so it came as a surprise to the Foundation when the hat suddenly disappeared from secure containment, replaced by a note reading, "Thanks, I needed my hat back, LS." Who was this mysterious LS? And was the anomaly truly theirs prior to containment? Scientists, security officials, and administrators hoped this would be an isolated incident, but LS was far from done. And even worse for the Foundation, LS was now armed with a perfect anomalous tool to make their next containment breach even smoother. The next incident was known as Security Breach Incident X-23, and was committed against the extremely valuable Site-19, the largest Foundation site there is. Most humiliating of all for the Foundation security team working there, security footage indicated that LS simply strolled into the base without being noticed. SCP-6666 was working wonders. This time LS had a new target, SCP-914, an anomalous machine also known as the Clockworks. This machine, originally tested by the famously emotionalist Dr. Charles Gears, has the ability to refine any object placed into its chambers into a greater version of their original selves, often with strange and anomalous results. You can probably see why someone wanting to utilize anomalies for their own gain would take such a keen interest in this one. LS breezed past the guards, inexplicably destroyed the file for SCP-407, a taped song that causes unchecked cellular growth, and made their way towards 914. Unfortunately, a researcher who was working on 914 was murdered by LS during the breach. We have no idea what they did with 914. Perhaps they refined 268 to act as an even more effective stealth tool, without its unpleasant side effects. Maybe they made the daring move of refining themselves. We'll never know. All we do know is that this time, LS left a letter. It was long, rambling, and philosophical, with no incriminating information that could be used to identify the mysterious figure. They signed off the letter with, "I leave you with one final truth. The garden is the Serpent's place. The divinities of fear and order who come to walk in the cool evening air are only visitors. Do not fail to see the evil hiding in the light, nor the aromatic beauty of the palest flower of darkness. Signed sincerely, LS." These repeated references to the Serpent clued the Foundation in on the affiliation of this new troublemaker, a growing group of interest named the Serpent's Hand. But really, who are the Serpent's Hand? What do they want? What is their connection to other active groups of interest, like the Chaos Insurgency and the Global Occult Coalition? And was this mysterious LS figure the leader of the group, or just another agent? These were all the questions on the minds of the Foundation's best and brightest tactical thinkers, but the answers didn't come easy. During the Serpent's Hand's investigations, the Foundation found an unlikely ally in what is usually one of their biggest opponents, the Global Occult Coalition. The GOC had dealt with the Serpent's Hand before and understood their central philosophy. Whereas the Foundation and the GOC were both committed to acting in secret and maintaining a sense of normality, the Serpent's Hand wanted the exact opposite. They wanted to destroy the secrecy around the anomalous and supernatural and reveal the existence of it all to the general public. While the Foundation and the GOC think this is crazy, the Serpent's Hand aren't just insane architects who want to unleash chaos across the world. In fact, they actually have some pretty interesting points. The Serpent's Hand acknowledges that the supernatural can be dangerous, but much like natural disasters and crime, will the public benefit from not knowing about them? Members of the Serpent's Hand also fight for the rights of non-violent anomalous entities, particularly sentient and sapient beings. They find the Foundation's habit of containing them and the GOC's habit of killing them barbaric, and will openly use and collaborate with anomalies to further their goals. Like how LS is a keen operator of 268 for their infiltration missions. At least 177 individuals belonging to the Serpent's Hand have been identified, many of which who have actively performed raids on Foundation sites across the globe. It was a mystery to the Foundation how such a small number of members could run rings around them, and seemingly be everywhere at once, until a revelation was delivered by the Global Occult Coalition. The Serpent's Hand have an informal headquarters in an anomalous location known as the Wanderer's Library, an ancient and seemingly limitless archive containing every book from every dimension in the multiverse. This location exists outside of space and time, and can be accessed through a global network of interdimensional portals known as the Ways. Like a supernatural guerrilla soldier, members of the Serpent's Hand would exit from one of the Ways, raid a Foundation or GOC site, and then escape back into another one of the Ways, using the Wanderer's Library as a safe zone. The library was a convenient way to access and steal from sites worldwide with impunity, increasing their stock of anomalous items and beings each time. While performing raids and stealing anomalies feel like textbook Chaos Insurgency behavior, The Serpent's Hand have an extremely frosty relationship with the insurgency too, often seeing them as greedy, erratic, and short-sighted. The Serpent's Hand has a series of catchy nicknames for its various foes. It refers to the Foundation as the Jailers, the GOC as the Bookburners, and the Chaos Insurgency as the Madmen. The Foundation even formed a new task force, known as the Bookworms, explicitly for Serpent's Hand-related missions. While the Foundation has engaged in a number of raids and skirmishes on the Serpent's Hand since their feud began, they've never been able to gather any information about who gives the orders. Only the Global Occult Coalition have been able to successfully perform a raid on the Wanderer's library, an act that was extremely difficult and costly. It also earned the GOC a spot as the Serpent's Hand's public enemy #1, a role the Foundation isn't eager to take from them. With the unlimited knowledge present in the Wanderer's library and the mysterious nature of their command structure, this group manages to be a formidable enemy for the Foundation despite its small size. What the Foundation doesn't know is that there actually is no command structure for the Serpent's Hand. They're a decentralized group of splinter cells and lone wolves acting out a philosophy rather than a specific mission. This way of working is so alien to the highly regimented structures of the Foundation and the GOC, it's no surprise that they're stumped by it. This still leaves us with one more question central to the whole mystery. If not the leader of this organization, who exactly is LS? To answer this, we must return once more to Dr. Charles Ogden Gears, the cold and robotic Foundation scientist in charge of SCP-914 research. If all the ways Dr. Gears has been described so far has made you think he wouldn't be a particularly warm and loving father, you'd be absolutely right. Just ask his estranged daughter, Allison Chow. Allison never forgave Gears for abandoning her and her mother, and she now does everything she can to get revenge on him and his precious Foundation. But here's the problem. The Gears of this dimension is not the only one who has a child with an axe to grind. Gears has been a deadbeat dad in a number of dimensions, so much so that these disgruntled daughters converge in the Wanderer's library to plot their revenge across dimensions together. This collective of Allison Chows, sometimes believed to just be one Allison, is known to the Foundation as the Black Queen. However, they themselves more commonly refer to their daughter support group turned terrorist organization as the Little Sisters, or, if you'd prefer, the abbreviation LS. While the Serpent's Hand has no leader, the Little Sisters are some of its most devoted and dangerous warriors. They're intelligent, coordinated, and, due to their obsession with Dr. Gears, personally invested in hitting the Foundation where it hurts. After all, that's what the Serpent's Hand is all about. Striking out against the oppressors who keep a stranglehold on the truth, throwing off the chains imposed by the Foundation, and the violence visited upon anomalies by the Global Occult Coalition. If the Serpent's Hand gets their way, one day there may be a glorious world where humans and anomalies knowingly coexist. It is a nice thing to imagine, utopian even. But the Foundation's greatest concern about the Serpent's Hand isn't that they're evil, it is that they're naive. While the Serpent's Hand don't wish to usher in the apocalypse, it doesn't mean they won't by complete accident. Their kindness and understanding towards anomalies may one day make them a perfect band of useful idiots for an entity with far darker intentions. And one day, they may just release something that would really be better locked away. There was nothing out of the ordinary about Timmy Mason. Like a lot of healthy 8-year-old boys, Timmy liked to go on little adventures in and around his neighborhood. And now that summer vacation had finally rolled around, he had more time than ever to explore. But during one particularly hot day, Timmy suddenly realized that he was exhausted. The heat was beginning to get to him, and he'd forgotten to pack a water bottle. All he had was a couple of dollars and a handful of quarters rattling around in his pocket. He was considering heading to a nearby corner store and purchasing a drink when he first heard the music. It was a tinny rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel playing in the distance, underscored by the rumbling of an engine. Timmy's face lit up. This could only mean one thing: an ice cream truck, just in time. He ran in the direction of the sounds, not wanting to miss out on the cool, sweet relief from the intense summer heat. But when the ice cream truck suddenly rounded a corner and came into view, Timmy felt a pang of anxiety. It didn't look like most of the ice cream trucks he had seen driving around his neighborhood in prior summers. It was shoddy, an older, more boxy model with peeling white paint. But it was so hot out that Timmy felt he couldn't afford to be picky if he wanted to cool off. The ice cream truck came to a noisy stop, and Timmy ran over. When he reached the side of the truck, he noticed some other strange details. There was no serving hatch in the back of the truck. The closest thing was a thin, dark groove cut into the driver's side door. A door that seemed almost drawn onto the side of the truck, rather than a door that looked like it could actually open. How could the driver get in? And adding to the strangeness, there was no menu on the truck either. Typically on your friendly neighborhood ice cream truck, you'd find a colorful collection of all the frozen treats you could buy, along with how much they'd cost you, but not here. Timmy gulped nervously. He knew something was wrong here, but for some reason he couldn't seem to pull himself away. He cleared his throat, forced a polite smile, and said, "Can I get a green popsicle, please?" There was a strange rumbling noise inside the ice cream truck. Suddenly, the slot in the door opened a little wider, and a long green popsicle in a plastic wrapper emerged. It came with a small piece of paper, with $5.75 in loose, scratchy handwriting on it. Timmy regarded the note with suspicion and said that he was sorry, but he didn't have $5.75. Something inside the truck began rumbling again, louder this time, more aggressive. While the truck growled from within, Timmy noticed something else was wrong. His popsicle was no ordinary popsicle. It was a dead snake, straightened out and frozen solid. Timmy screamed and dropped the so-called popsicle. He turned and began to run, but it was already too late. The slot behind him yawned open fully, and a rusty spring-loaded chain fired out like a harpoon. On the end of this chain was a large snapping bear trap, which quickly latched onto Timmy's left leg. The chain yanked and pulled him backwards, dragging him ever closer to the darkened crevice in the truck's door. Moments later, he was pulled inside and the hatch closed behind him. His screams were muffled, and then overpowered entirely by the rumbling within. Soon after, there was silence. And finally, the cheerful tune of Pop Goes the Weasel began to play once more. The truck drove away, prepared to serve its frozen delights to another child, somewhere, anywhere. Not long after Timmy was reported missing, another young boy bought a scoop of strawberry ice cream in a waffle cone from the same truck. The boy's mother was horrified to find that this alleged ice cream was full of what seemed like blood and raw meat. Lab tests later confirmed that this gory ice cream was a perfect genetic match for poor, missing Timmy Mason. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to get involved, seeing as mysterious, horrifying deaths like this one were often the first sign of an anomaly's presence in the area, and they were able to quickly track down and isolate the rogue ice cream truck. This wasn't especially difficult for the agents assigned to the case, since it literally announced its presence with loud, obnoxious music. While it was easy to find, the ice cream truck, soon designated SCP-1386, did however prove to be more difficult to contain than they first imagined. When a mobile task force attempted to engage the truck in hopes of apprehending it, an ear-splitting siren began to blast from the truck's undercarriage. This caused catastrophic inner-ear damage to everyone involved. Incidentally, it's now believed that the reason the ice cream truck engaged in this defensive behavior had nothing to do with the fact the mobile task force was armed, but rather because of what they weren't carrying. It appears that SCP-1386 doesn't turn on its siren because of danger, but when it detects that someone is approaching it who isn't carrying any money. Eventually, the Foundation was able to trick the ice cream truck into containment, luring it into a fake, walled-off neighborhood, where it could drive its rounds constantly without the risk of encountering civilians. All those who had previous encounters with the ice cream truck were given amnestic treatment, and SCP-1386 was finally, officially, contained. But while it had been taken off the streets, the Foundation's work was only just beginning. It was time for research to commence. The first key discoveries that aided in the investigation involved the factors that are required for SCP-1386 to even serve its subjects in the first place. As the previously mentioned Mobile Task Force learned, you need to approach the truck with at least $20 in cash to be absolutely sure that it won't turn your ears inside out. The truck also proves to be extremely adept at reading human emotions, and refuses to serve anyone who doesn't appear happy. With these requirements now known, the Foundation felt prepared to finally make some orders. First, they sent in a pair of Level 3 researchers. Each of them requested a delicious cookies and cream flavored smoothie. The truck pushed both smoothies out of the slot in its door, one marked with the letter M and the other with the letter G. A handwritten receipt with a price of $4.89 written on it. They paid the price and the transaction ended without incident. The smoothies were apparently pretty good, too. Next, one of the researchers returned, perhaps longing for another taste of SCP-1386's wonderful ice cream. This time he requested a Neapolitan ice cream sandwich. The truck rumbled for a moment before dispensing what seemed to be a ham and cheese sandwich with slices of tomato. However, upon taking a bite out of the sandwich, the researcher found that this was actually just a perfect replica of a ham and cheese sandwich made from Neapolitan ice cream. The receipt released from the slot simply said, "April Fools," before the truck drove away without even asking for any payment. The same researcher would return to the ice cream truck one more time, this time requesting a single scoop of vanilla ice cream in a waffle cone. It was provided to him without issue, and he happily paid the 72 cents the truck requested in return. The next test wouldn't go quite as swimmingly, by which we mean it caused a horrifying death. This time, a slightly more senior researcher wanted to perform a test on the ice cream truck. He asked for a peach-flavored push pop, which he received without issue. However, when he refused to pay the price, an admittedly steep $16, all hell broke loose. As he tried to walk away, the hatch opened a full 6 feet, releasing its large, rusty metal trap around the senior researcher. He was pulled into the truck, followed by a horrific rumbling noise. Not long after, the slot began to spew a stream of pink liquid for a solid 5 minutes, before driving away. This pink puree was later proven to be a genetic match to the researcher. After this, the Foundation refused to allow any other researchers to interact with SCP-1386. Only D-Class personnel would be permitted to take part in the tests. In contrast to the senior researcher's horrifying death, the D-Class personnel seemed to get along extremely well with SCP-1386. The first D-Class asked for a cherry popsicle with nuts. The truck produced an unwrapped cherry popsicle with nuts embedded in the ice, along with a receipt reading $2.20, your nuts. The D-Class chuckled as he read the receipt and paid the truck without incident. The second D-Class requested a more esoteric treat, a Caesar salad flavor popsicle. However, the ice cream truck isn't one to back down from a challenge. It produced an off-green popsicle that tasted like, quote, lightly dressed lettuce with a hint of croutons. The next D-Class ordered a dark chocolate fudge pop, but wasn't able to pay an exact change. He gave the truck $2 bills and was given a carefully wrapped package with a crude drawing of US currency on the front. When the package was opened, he saw that it contained the exact change he required down to the penny. He made an official request to the Foundation to keep the change, but his request was denied. The Foundation then pushed its D-Class personnel to ask for more complex constructions, just to see what SCP-1386 was capable of. The next D-Class asked for a Kinder Surprise egg, the kind which are banned in the US due to their history as being a choking hazard. However, the ice cream truck didn't have a hard time constructing the egg, except this one was made out of ice cream rather than chocolate. It did seem beyond the truck's capability to create the toy inside, instead including a small piece of paper reading, "I owe you one toy." The next interaction wasn't quite as cordial. The D-Class requested 1 cherry ice lolly, 1 cherry ice pop, 1 cherry popsicle, and 1 cherry-flavored drink, frozen. This resulted in the ice cream truck making a horrifying noise, described as being like someone skinning a cat in reverse. It then unceremoniously ejected the red ice, causing it to shatter on the ground, before releasing a styrofoam cup filled with frozen green liquid. This liquid was shown to contain huge quantities of arsenic, but was thankfully impossible to drink, on account of the fact that its melting point is so high that it's impossible to liquefy with current technology. And our current knowledge of SCP-1386 testing ends with its strangest story of all. A nonverbal D-Class was instructed to write his order on a piece of paper to pass to the truck, in hopes of seeing if it would respond to written commands. A slot opened up in the door a few inches lower than the usual slot, and a thin, flesh-colored appendage slithered out. its hand a kind of two-fingered pincher. It took the note from the D-Class and gave him an ice cream cone in return. The D-Class was visibly disturbed by the hand, saying that it looked horrifying and smelled like death. He even refused to eat the ice cream, saying that he'd lost his appetite. But other D-Classes capable of verbal articulation did not report any strange occurrences with the hand. They said that they found the hand to look completely normal, and as time went on, they began to trust the ice cream truck with increasing devotion, while their mistrust in the disturbed, mute D-Class only grew. In the strangest twist of all, this D-Class was later found dead in his cell from strangulation. The Foundation declared the death a suicide, but only because they could find no other logical way that the D-Class could have died. The D-Class was alone in his cell, and there were no signs of forced entry. Perhaps he should have enjoyed his ice cream while he still could. You know what they say, I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. And no ice cream is more scream-worthy than the one served up by SCP-1386. Climbers attempting to summit Mount Everest and stand on the top of the world have their work cut out for them. Dangers are everywhere on the long climb. There's a risk of extreme altitude sickness, unpredictable winds, and freezing weather. There's also the threat of avalanches, great unstoppable tidal waves of snow that can bury a person alive in seconds or strand them, leaving them to freeze to death cold and alone. It's a sad reality that not everyone that visits Everest comes back down again, and rarely does a climbing season go by that the mountain doesn't claim yet another victim. Situated on the border between China and Nepal, in a sub-range of the Himalayas of Tibet, Everest is one of the 7 wonders of the natural world. With an elevation of 29,031 feet, or 8,848 meters, Mount Everest has attracted many experienced mountain climbers over the decades. But even for the most experienced mountaineers, the ascension up its snowy slopes is far from easy. Deaths occurring on Mount Everest are nothing new, and hundreds of people are believed to have died attempting to ascend the treacherous peak. Sadly, due to the risks involved with carrying heavy loads down off the mountain, many of those who die on Everest are doomed to stay there forever, their frozen bodies serving up as their own grave markers. It's difficult enough to move your own body up and down Everest, and in many situations, bringing a body back down is simply impossible. The bodies of these lost souls are scattered all across and sometimes underneath the surface of Mount Everest. But some of those bodies are different from the others, and have a special name within the files of the SCP Foundation. They call them SCP-5140. SCP-5140 is the designation given to a number of frozen bodies which are found all across Everest. It is unclear exactly how many instances of SCP-5140 there are, though some estimates have placed the number at somewhere between 1 and 200. At present, it is unknown if all the instances of SCP-5140 are dead bodies belonging to climbers who met tragedy on the tallest mountain in the world, or if some of them are something else entirely. But while their origin is unclear, if you come into contact with a 5140 instance, there won't be any doubt that it's different from the normal body of a dead climber. That's because SCP-5140 corpses are a lot like vampires in some ways. That isn't to say that they actually are vampires. They certainly are not undead and cannot function after death. But much like a vampire traditionally drains blood to survive, these bodies drain heat. SCP-5140 corpses are ectoentropic, meaning they do not adhere to the normal laws of thermodynamics. Whenever these cadavers are exposed to sources of heat, including human body heat, the corpse will instantly drain the source of any and all thermal energy. However, the temperature of these SCP-5140 bodies remains the same, regardless of how much heat they are able to drain, staying at a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Should any living person come into direct contact with one of the SCP-5140 corpses, the body will absorb their natural body heat, bringing their victim's own temperature down to 10 degrees Celsius and causing them to die. And once they have died, their body then becomes a new instance of SCP-5140. As a quick side note, this might feel vaguely reminiscent of another anomaly, which features seemingly inert dead bodies that are hazardous to anyone around them. SCP-2316. This anomaly is a powerful mimetic hazard consisting of a large number of drowned human corpses. These corpses are extremely hazardous to approach at even a considerable distance, as the mimetic hazard inherent to the anomaly causes those affected to recognize the bodies in the water as people they know, particularly from their childhood. Like a siren's call, the victims are lured into the water, believing that the familiar bodies are calling to them. If the victims aren't stopped, quarantined, and given amnestic treatment, they are essentially considered lost. They will walk into the water and be absorbed into the collective, becoming just another body floating in the water. While the Foundation doesn't currently believe that there is any official connection between the two anomalies, the similarities are undeniable and worth taking into consideration. Moving on. At present, it is unclear whether SCP-5140 corpses are caused by some sort of infection or parasite that spreads among the bodies uncovered at Mount Everest. If this is the case, the Foundation has yet to uncover the patient zero, the root cause of these infected bodies. There is also little to determine why a deceased body requires the absorption of heat, as well as how it achieves this and also keeps its own temperature low but not frozen. Given that interacting with an instance of SCP-5140 can be fatal, it does seem that these anomalous properties can be passed through contact and exposure, like a disease or a parasite. But there have been no observed anomalous effects among any living person visiting Mount Everest. There is a possibility that the SCP-5140 corpses have developed some form of posthumous mutation that has come as a result of being killed during an Everest avalanche and buried in the snow, their bodies starved of heat after death. After all, Everest is known for its cold temperatures, occasionally reaching as low as 1 degree Fahrenheit or minus 17 degrees Celsius, not to mention the difference in air pressure at such high altitudes, as well as frequent high-speed freezing cold winds. At the summit of Mount Everest, wind speeds can reach up to 280 kilometers per hour. That is equivalent to 175 miles per hour. And high-speed winds have even been known to catch mountain climbers off guard and send them plummeting to their deaths. Perhaps the combination of these conditions, the freezing temperature, the air pressure, and the winds have triggered some sort of change in a number of the bodies unfortunate enough to never leave the snow-covered slopes of Mount Everest. Either that, or these abandoned corpses left in such extreme cold could be the perfect home. Maybe some form of unknown and so far undetected parasite is capable of inhabiting these frozen bodies, and can spread to other living hosts by draining them of their body heat. Stranger things have certainly happened at the SCP Foundation, and that could possibly explain why anyone interacting with an SCP-5140 corpse meets the same grisly fate. Regardless of what causes these abnormalities, or why the SCP-5140 bodies have only been uncovered at Mount Everest, close contact with the corpses often result in casualties and fatalities. Naturally, this is a cost the SCP Foundation likes to avoid as often as it can. The nasty habit SCP-5140 corpses have of draining a person's body heat makes it impractical to bring them back to a Foundation research facility for testing, as does the fact that they're on the tallest mountain in the world. Instead, MTF Delta-14 have been tasked with keeping these heat-thirsty cadavers contained to Mount Everest. Mobile Task Force Delta-14, also known under the codename Winter Wonderland, is formed of a group of particularly adept mountaineers, and experts in understanding and adapting to particularly brutal terrain without drawing attention to themselves. These covert operatives are tasked with periodically climbing Mount Everest and keeping SCP-5140 contained. It is this team's job to locate any new instance of SCP-5140 bodies and bury them in the snow. In doing so, the goal is to prevent any unwitting mountain climbers from stumbling upon one of these bodies and potentially becoming a new instance themselves. Meanwhile, the Foundation is pushing for both Nepal and Tibet to tighten restrictions on climbing permits. But of course, the money that Mount Everest tourism brings to these two countries has likely impeded this. According to the Foundation's file on SCP-5140, an incident occurred during one of Mobile Task Force Delta-14's annual Everest expeditions. Members of MTF Delta-14 had been traversing towards the Everest summit, encountering more and more of the SCP-5140 bodies as they made their way up the mountain. Just as they were instructed to do so, the team buried each of the frozen corpses they came across under a blanket of snow. The Delta-14s noticed, though, that there had been a much higher number of the frosty cadavers on this mission, speculating that perhaps Mount Everest's high winds had blown the snow off of ones they had already buried on previous missions. One of the Delta 14s, a man named Charlie Smith, was in correspondence with his colleagues at their base camp. Charlie reported that one of his fellow Winter Wonderlanders, Patrick, had touched one of the SCP-5140 corpses when the team reached the summit, and that he was now buried according to protocols after becoming an SCP-5140 instance himself. As they began their descent from atop Everest, Charlie sent an urgent communication to base camp, reporting that he'd uncovered 3 more SCP-5140 bodies at an abandoned campsite. Except these 3 instances were different from any he had encountered before. These corpses were somehow still moving. Attempting to hurry down the mountain, Charlie reported that a mass of SCP-5140 corpses were blocking his path and draining another one of his squad mates, Arnold, of his body heat to make him one of them. Arnold had been carrying the team's provisions, including their oxygen reserves, to combat the lack of breathable air at Mount Everest's high altitude. Charlie tried in vain to use his flare gun to clear the path, hoping to distract the now walking cadavers with a heat source, but it had no effect. His final message to base camp warned the rest of Delta 14 to not come to the summit of Everest, with Charlie frantically urging them to not let climbers anywhere near it. His final message simply stated that the mountain is danger. A rescue division of Mobile Task Force Delta 14 arrived just under 2 hours later, tracking Charlie's last known location via a GPS beacon. Strangely, despite the frantic messages from Charlie, there were no signs of any SCP-5140 instances. None of the piles of corpses he had warned them about could be seen above the snow, and certainly none of them were moving. It wasn't long before the rescue team found Charlie, though. He was dead, but not drained of heat or turned into another instance of SCP-5140. No, sadly, after bringing their fallen comrade back to base, an autopsy revealed that Charlie had died likely the same way so many other climbers on Everest had. He had suffered from a lack of oxygen. Further examination of his gear revealed that Charlie's oxygen intake valve had been damaged earlier while the squad had been climbing to the summit of Mount Everest. His teammates Arnold Hillary and Patrick Edmund were also discovered on the mountain, but only Patrick had been turned into an SCP-5140 instance. Arnold had simply died from exposure, just like Charlie. The rescue team concluded that due to lack of adequate oxygen, Charlie Smith had hallucinated the sight of SCP-5140 corpses moving and blocking his path, spending his final moments in terror as the mountain's conditions slowly killed him. The Foundation is still unsure exactly what causes bodies to become instances of SCP-5140, or even how many of them are on Everest, but a major and troubling development has recently been made. After an increase in global temperature led to a large avalanche that resulted in a large portion of the mountain that had previously been covered in thick snow being exposed, the Foundation sent planes that were equipped with thermal imaging equipment to scan the mountain. What they found was as confusing as it was terrifying. The SCP-5140 corpses aren't just spread across the surface of Mount Everest, they are much of Everest. The mountain itself is just a huge pile of corpses, just waiting to drain the life from anyone who attempts to scale it and turn them into a permanent part of the peak. So if you were planning a trip to the Himalayas, hoping to scratch climb Mount Everest off your bucket list, maybe give it a pass. Otherwise, you might find that the climb is even colder than you were expecting.
Roll up, come one and all. The circus is in town, and not just any circus. The greatest show in all the multiverse. Don't pay attention to the fact that the tents weren't here yesterday, or that you don't remember hearing anything about it before now. That's just the circus magic at work. And there's no circus more magical or more mysterious than Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. It's a show so marvelous that even the SCP Foundation wants to get in on the act. So come watch the show, come feel the magic. After all, what do you have to lose? The story of this humbling traveling show begins in 1893 with the founder Herman S. Fuller. He was born into a wealthy family, and at the age of 21, he was invited by his uncle to Chicago to see the buildings his company had constructed for the World's Fair. He was dazzled by the sights he saw in the Windy City, and from then on he dedicated his life to finding a way to bring that same awe to people across America, and eventually, the world. After receiving a small loan from his uncle, Herman Fuller set about building the miraculous circus you see before you today. He knew he had to get a leg up over his competitors. After all, the 1890s were a golden age for traveling shows in America. So Herman devoted his time to research, trying to find acts and oddities that were truly out of this world. He learned the way between worlds, stole books from the Wanderer's library, and with them studied alchemy, transmutation, sarcasm, and other supernatural disciplines. That real magic and touch of the macabre would be what made Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting so special, and would ultimately give it its longevity. Herman Fuller's first anomalous acquisition was a genuine Fiji mermaid, like the one that famed showman P.T. Barnum kept on display around the same time period. Unlike Barnum's, however, Fuller's mermaid had been brought to life. The crowds loved it, but like all attractions, pretty soon crowds grew bored of it and hungered for the next strange sight. So Fuller went about acquiring more curiosities. His next important acquisition was the man with the upside-down face, or Manny for short. He serves as second in command to the ringmaster and manages things behind the scenes, including the acquisition of new talent. Many other anomalous beings and items were purchased for the circus by Fuller through the auction company known as Marshall, Carter & Dark, another group that the SCP Foundation makes a habit of keeping tabs on. Another thing that sets this circus apart from any others is the clowns, because they aren't like any you've seen before. Though Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting employs professional clowns, the vast majority of the clown troupe are non-human descendants of an extra-dimensional race of magical shapeshifters. Nobody really knows why they decided to come to our reality and help Herman Fuller set up his circus, but the leading theory is simply that they were bored. These original clowns are the progenitors of the Turn Clowns and the Bread Clowns. Turn Clowns being humans who underwent a clown transformation procedure, and the Bread Clowns being artificially grown children produced by the other two types. Earlier in the circus's history, before we knew what we know today about genetics, much more barbaric methods were used to create new clowns. Young human subjects would be subjected to beatings and painful transfigurations at the hands of the circus's child breaker. These days, however, the circus no longer employs a child breaker. Instead, the creation of new clowns is the responsibility of resident clown breeder, Richard C. Normus. And before you say anything, don't laugh. That is his real name. Some of the most famous clowns in the troupe are Eugene and Pius, both of which are original clowns. Mr. Noodles, who is a bread clown, and Icky the troupe leader, who was once a human with magical abilities known as Veronica Mason. She still possesses her anomalous powers as Icky, and her magic act is one of the most beloved parts of our show. After the sudden disappearance of Herman Fuller, Icky inherited his position as ringmaster and has been doing a spectacular job ever since. Not every attempt to create new clowns has been successful as Icky and Mr. Noodles, though. Some of the earlier attempts were quite grotesque to look at. Herman Fuller's troupe of clowns are an enthusiastic, happy-go-lucky, but occasionally violent bunch, capable of minor feats of reality bending that allow them to perform all manner of tricks. They live on a diet of mostly sugar and need to be milked regularly. Clown milk is an invaluable substance here at the circus, as it's the secret ingredient of the famous black cotton candy, which, by the way, is free with admission. It causes the brain to produce high levels of serotonin, meaning that when you eat it, you're primed to have a great time. Be careful though. Raw, concentrated clown milk is not for human consumption. Though the clowns love to drink it, even a small amount can cause a human to go into cardiac arrest due to an overload of happiness. The sound of calliope music also goes a long way to helping people truly get the most out of their visit to Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. The calliope is self-playing and requires rolls of perforated paper to be loaded into it so that it can play a variety of pre-programmed pieces of music. Each piece produces a different psychological effect on visitors who have consumed their cotton candy. The skater's waltz will make them accept whatever they see at the circus, no matter how weird, as nothing out of the ordinary. Wonderful for making sure nobody blabs about their experience to a certain pesky foundation. Officer of the Year makes them less likely to perceive an event as unlawful. We use that one when we suspect the cops are closing in.
"Hail, hail, the gang's all here," is used to get people to congregate at the big top for showtime. And American Patrol causes those who have eaten their cotton candy to seek out those who haven't, in order to strongly encourage them to have some. "What do you mean you lost your dog?" is one that gets played after hours, when it's time to get the clowns ready for milking. Now that you have an idea of the history and how things work around the circus, it's time for the tour. The circus is made up of a series of tents and trailers, as well as a midway with standard rides and games that you might find at any circus. Outside of the big top, where shows are performed once a day, there's also the Den of Freaks and the Hall of Humans Extraordinaire. The Den of Freaks is home to fantastic acts like Sluggo and Eliza the Living Head. Sluggo is a man whose eyes are on stalks like those of a slug, and he can bend those stalks into any shape he wishes. He can even use them to create the shapes of human faces. Eliza the Living Head is a woman whose head lives independently of her body, which is safely kept in storage. Even without her body, she can speak and sing and often answers questions from the audience. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire is home to performers who lack physical anomalies, but otherwise display otherworldly talents like the amazing Zoltan, a fortune teller and alchemist who Fuller picked up at a place called the Utterly Bizarre. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire also used to be home to Icky the Clown, back when she was still Veronica the Magician. The recent lineup has changed quite a bit thanks mainly to the activities of the circus's constant enemy. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. Or as they are better known to the stable of interdimensional clowns as the Miss SCP Foundation. The Foundation does not appear to be a fan of circus folk, and many of the former acts are now in their containment. For example, Madame Rezarta and her amazing palm reader, also known as SCP-1884-A and SCP-1884-B. Madame Rezarta was a blind Albanian woman in her 60s who was born without hands. She shared a psychic link with a creature named Luana, who was a large shapeless entity made up of 932 hands. 929 of these hands appear to be those of an old woman and share Madame Rezarta's DNA, but the remaining 3 hands seem to be from a male Caucasian adolescent, an adult Hispanic female, and a Bengal tiger. Through her psychic link, Luana acted as Madame Rezarta's eyes, feeling its surroundings to provide her with a mental map. Fuller attempted to buy the 2 of them when they were 8 years old, but when their parents refused, he sent Manny to whisk them away under the cover of darkness. Madame Rezarta's act involved sending Luana to feel the faces of audience members, and then trying to describe their appearance based on what Luana felt. The act was a hit, but Madame Rezarta claimed to have been horribly abused during her time with Herman Fuller. The 2 of them escaped while on tour and were picked up by old SCP while trying to rent a hotel room in the UAE. Then there's Virtuoso, also known as SCP-1860. Virtuoso was once a book of sheet music that was transfigured by Herman Fuller into one of the circus's original acts. It's a tall, thin humanoid being encased in a densely woven paper-based material that stretches like nylon or spandex. It constantly drips black ink which it has a telekinetic control over. It uses the ink to create the shapes of musical notes, which float around it while it sings. Virtuoso can sing in multiple voices at once across different vocal ranges, and constantly performs arias and show tunes for whoever is listening. It was recovered from underneath a burnt-down shack at a fairground where the circus had been set up earlier. In Containment, Virtuoso still sings, but translations from Italian reveal that the lyrics of the arias it's singing have been changed to reflect its own situation. Some of these translated lyrics include, "One day I'll tell you of my creation and life within the circus, born from the ringmaster, his breed." Another act the circus dearly misses is Motormouth, also known as SCP-2094. He was one of the rare human clowns born in New York City in the late 70s. From birth, he displayed a supernatural level of flexibility in his lower jaw, and as he grew older, he discovered that he could swallow large objects and store them in a kind of pocket dimension until he needed them again. Unlike Madame Rezarta, he went with Manny willingly,
as even at 8 years old, he knew that his alcoholic mother didn't care if he lived or died. Motormouth took to the circus like a fish to water and grew from a shy child into a very talented, talkative, and highly charismatic adult. He was a juggler first and foremost, who would catch pins, balls, and knives in his mouth as part of his routine. But the name Motormouth came later in his career when he let a stunt driver drive a car off a ramp and down his throat. However, as great an act he was, a conflict arose between him and Manny over Manny's questionable methods of sourcing new acts. Manny found out that Motormouth had been helping some of the anomalous kids that Manny brought in to get back to their families. And as punishment for his insubordination, he was locked in a box and left behind at the end of a Japanese tour. The box was marked for Essie, because Manny thought being put in containment was the best punishment he could think of. With how strange and unusual its acts are, and how it always seems to pop in and out of new locations at strange and unpredictable times, you might wonder if the circus has any sinister motives. Well, the truth is, though sometimes the acts can be a little gruesome, their methods of acquiring new talent are a little unorthodox, and the clowns a little out of control. Their only goal is to entertain. In that respect, they're no better or worse than any other circus. So we hope you've enjoyed your visit. Make sure to stick around for the show, and don't forget to take your complimentary serving of cotton candy. Because there's nothing quite like a day at the circus, especially one like Herman Fuller's. Addiction. It takes many forms and wears many faces, like a demon walking among us. It takes over your life, crawling in and changing you from the inside out. Breaking an addiction is hard, but oftentimes not giving it up is much harder. That was a difficult lesson to learn for 3 people: Joey Walker, Dolly McGregor, and Paul Abels. These 3 had never met one another, and now they never will. But each one of them had 2 things in common. First was that each had an addiction they felt like they couldn't shake, and second was that they each had a run-in with SCP-666. Joey Walker was at the end of his rope when he encountered it. Everyone has bad days, but for Joey, every day for the last 15 years has been a bad day. He was pushing 40 with nothing to show for it, except credit card debt, a scraggly beard, and a beat-up old Mustang. But booze had always been there for him. No matter how bad things got, he could always count on a glass full of comfort at the end of the day. But to paraphrase a quote by Stephen King, sometimes when a man takes a drink, the drink takes the man. And Joey Walker had been long since taken. He was a transient worker, doing jobs wherever jobs needed doing, but he never expected that he would end up all the way to Tibet working construction. Not that he was complaining. Sure, it was cold, but there was plenty of Tibetan Chang to enjoy. It was a drink so good that legends even say that Yetis would raid villages in the mountains just to get a little taste. Joey had taken a liking to the Chang, and it was what he had been drinking when he crashed his car up in the mountains, leaving him stranded in the snow. Joey had survived the crash itself, but he knew he wouldn't last long in the cold. He needed shelter. That's why he felt like he could hardly believe his luck when he first saw the yurt, a kind of traditional Tibetan tent made from animal skins. Joey had never seen anything quite like it, but any refuge from the storm would do. He pushed forward through the snow and climbed inside. But the inside of the yurt was nothing like the outside. In fact, it seemed like an exact replica of his favorite sports bar back in Atlantic City. It was warm. There was all the old memorabilia on the walls, and every screen was showing the Saints wiping the floor with the Colts in the 2010 Super Bowl. Joey didn't even question it. He just smiled and approached the bar. He even recognized the bartender, Malcolm, a good old friend of his. Malcolm smiled back at him, but there was something oddly menacing in his grin. "Welcome back," he said. "I thought you'd hauled your sorry keister off to Tibet. Guess you gave up on that too, just like everything else." "Well, except..." Malcolm pushed a glass of beer towards him across the bar and glared. Joey didn't understand why Malcolm was being so aggressive, but he didn't question that either. He grabbed the glass and drank it up, guzzling it down before slamming the empty glass down on the bar. Malcolm kept the drinks coming,
round after round, and Joey kept knocking them back. He didn't notice when the TV screens turned to static. He didn't notice when the other patrons at the bar began to jitter and twitch, turning little by little into something less than human. He didn't even notice when Malcolm's face started melting off his skull, as long as he kept pouring. Before he could even really understand what was happening to him, Joey Walker was dead. His liver and kidneys had given out on him. His corpse would later be found frozen on the Tibetan mountainside, just 30 feet away from his crashed car. The coroner's report would list his cause of death as accidental, but this was no accident. He'd fallen victim to SCP-666, an anomalous yurt known to some as the Spirit House. The being he'd call Malcolm is known to the Foundation as SCP-666-1, and Joey had failed its challenge. Sadly for our inebriated friend, the penalty for failure is death. Next on our list of human tragedies comes Dolly McGregor, a 62-year-old woman from Anaheim, California. Dolly was never averse to the drink, but she knew how to enjoy her mojitos in moderation. You rarely get to 62 if you don't, and Dolly could tell people with pride that she had 2 children and 6 grandchildren, whom she didn't see nearly often enough for her liking. She also had over $100,000 in gambling debt owed to a number of casinos on the Vegas Strip. Ever since her husband Albert had passed away several years prior, shooting craps, playing blackjack, and willing away the hours in front of the slot machines had been a welcome change from loneliness. But in Vegas, fortunes can change in an instant. Dolly had gone from being on a hot winning streak to losing everything. The casinos extended her lines of credit until she was gambling with money she'd never be able to pay back. But that didn't stop her. She'd been selling off everything, even remortgaging the house that Albert had built with his own 2 hands to try and keep up with her ballooning debts. Still, it wasn't enough, but she couldn't stop either. It wasn't even that she felt good about it anymore. It was just that she only ever felt normal among the flashing lights of slot machines and the clatter of dice. She needed to get away, as far away as possible. She heard about people reaching spiritual enlightenment in Tibet. They'd discover God, or gods, or sometimes just a sense of inner peace. Whatever it was, she needed to find it and get this demon off her back. So she took the last of her savings and flew off to Tibet to clear her head. She didn't know if there were any casinos in Lhasa, but if there were, her money would surely be no good there. It was exactly what she needed. But Tibet wasn't the promised land she thought it would be. Wherever Dolly went, there she was, with the same vices and demons chasing her. The first night she spent in Lhasa, she used the hotel Wi-Fi to download an online poker app on her phone. This culminated in another couple $1,000s lost, and a panic attack that caused Dolly to throw her phone into her toilet before wandering off into the wilderness. She just needed to get away. But time and space got away from her, and eventually she was knee-deep in snow. Where had she come from? Where could she go? It quickly dawned on her that if she didn't find some kind of shelter soon, she'd be done for. But all she could do was keep walking. That's when she happened upon SCP-666. The yurt was like an oasis on the barren mountainside. She didn't expect comfort inside, but it could at least provide her some shelter until the staff back at the hotel noticed she was gone. Then they'd come and save her, right? Right. But when she passed through the yak leather flap into the yurt, Dolly wasn't in an ancient tent in the Tibetan wilderness. She was on a casino floor. There was a big, beautiful roulette table before her, attended to by a grinning, well-dressed croupier. They were flanked by an army of slot machines, and all the pleasing, familiar sounds of cheerful gambling rang out through the air. She approached the table and the croupier shook his head in what seemed like disappointment. Back again, eh, Dolly? He said with a sigh. Of course, I should have expected it. After all, what else do you have in that empty little life of yours, Without all this, you'd be nothing, right? Nothing at all. Since Albert died and the kids want nothing to do with you, we're all you've got. So Dolly, what'll it be? Red or black? Are you feeling lucky? His words wounded Dolly, but that wouldn't stop her. She grabbed her chips and put them all on red. One last spin couldn't hurt. What did she have to lose? She blinked, and she wasn't sitting at the table anymore. She was upright, but she wasn't standing. Her wrists and ankles were bound to something, to a wheel. A giant roulette wheel, like it was some kind of medieval torture device. The croupier was standing across from her, well, something that used to be a croupier. His face was flickering in and out. Sometimes it was human, sometimes it was a mass of eyes and teeth. More demons were sitting all at the slot machines behind him, pulling levers made from human bones. "Good choice, Dolly," the croupier said. "Red suits you." He reached out and gave the wheel a spin. Dolly was lost in an overwhelming, pulsing cascade of lights, colors, and sounds. The horrific, tinny noises of slot machines and the laughter of the demonic croupier. She was lost in panic and terror as she just kept spinning and spinning and spinning. When her body was eventually found, her muscles were in the advanced stages of atrophy, as though she hadn't been moving for years. Her brain was rotted, and the cause of death was determined as sudden cardiac arrest after an extended period of sleep deprivation and malnutrition. Dolly's family would never really know what happened to her. The SCP Foundation has learned a lot about SCP-666 after containing it in Site-73. Its anomalous effects, namely vivid, complex, and potentially fatal hallucinatory experiences, only affect those with some kind of addiction or dependency. To anyone else entering the yurt, it's just a normal tent, but any addicts who enter will fall under its spell, and are generally transported back to the place where their addiction was at its strongest. There they'll encounter SCP-666-1, an entity that takes the form of a figure from the subject's life, normally one heavily involved in facilitating their addiction. Any kind of addiction seems to trigger it. Alcohol, drugs, gambling, pornography, food, self-destructive behavior, even video games. SCP-666 kills its victims with a twisted mockery of the very thing that they were dependent on in life. It was only with Paul Abels that the Foundation started discovering the other side of the coin. By almost all accounts, Paul is a worse person than anyone on this list. He got addicted to hard drugs early on in life, and took up a life of violent crime to support his habit. He murdered 2 people during a liquor store robbery before being convicted and sentenced to death. He'd then been picked up as a D-class by the SCP Foundation, and selected as a test subject for SCP-666 due to his history of drug abuse. The Foundation expected to be adding his body to the incineration pile sometime soon. None of the researchers working on the case predicted what actually ended up happening. Paul was forced to enter the yurt. Not long after, he found himself standing in a place he'd done everything to try to forget. The dark graffiti-stained alley where he'd been sold his first hit. This was the place that destroyed his life. Every bad decision he'd ever made could be traced back to here, and specifically to one man, Frank. Frank was his first dealer, and now here he was, standing right across from him once more. Frank was grinning like a demon.
"Come on, Polly," he said. "You gotta trash. We both know what you're gonna do. Don't you feel it? The itch? Come on, one more hit, Polly. That's all you need to feel better. It's time to take your medicine."
Frank, or this thing pretending to be Frank, was right. He did feel the itch. He did want it. Maybe he was no better than this. He began to reach out towards Frank, but then he abruptly pulled his hand back. Frank's eyes widened in genuine surprise as Paul replied, "I'm sorry, that's not me anymore." SCP-666-1 gave a smile and said,
"Maybe it isn't, Polly. Maybe it isn't."
When Paul Abels was removed from the SCP-666 yurt by one of the attending guards, the Foundation researchers discovered something amazing. Paul was very much alive, and more incredibly, he didn't feel the cravings anymore. His addiction was gone, and further tests showed that Paul wasn't a one-off event. In fact, anyone who denies the temptation of SCP-666 will see their addictions miraculously disappear when they finally leave. After this, it became clear to the Foundation that SCP-666 isn't just a way to punish addicts. It's a kind of test. Those who want to change, who are willing to truly confront their demons and resist the pull of temptation, are rewarded with the one thing they want most in their life: freedom from their addiction. SCP-666 can be your doom or your salvation. And like most things in life, you get what you give. Can a thought be infectious? Is it possible that transferring an idea can happen as easily as catching the common cold? Someone gets it, then transmits it to another person who then passes it on to someone else, and so on. Imagine for a moment that information is a disease. We can't see information or feel it. We can read it in books or on the internet, but actually seeing it or feeling it inside our heads is impossible. So what if something could taint the information we absorb? Use it to slip its way undetected into your mind, then pass from you to your friends, your family, your coworkers. How would you know it was there? And how could you prevent it from getting into your head? Perhaps it's time you were introduced to SCP-3002. Over its many years of studying and containing anomalous beings and entities, the SCP Foundation has encountered a number of creatures with memetic abilities. If you are unfamiliar with the term, memetic usually refers to data or information that has been manipulated in order to influence or subconsciously change a person's behavior. This can take any form, from text and images to spoken phrases and other audio. For example, a form of memetic influence we have all experienced at some point is product placement. If you ever watched a character in a movie or on TV using a certain product, then that may have made you decide that you want to buy that same product for yourself. That idea was planted in your head by something you saw and had a subliminal influence on your behavior. SCP-3002 is one such entity that uses memetic stimuli for its own nefarious purposes. Some anomalies, like SCP-2440, use memetic information to spread knowledge of themselves among human beings, getting stronger the more people learn about it. SCP-3002, on the other hand, is information. This entity is a thought, a living, sentient thought, with a number of abilities that allow it to influence the minds of human beings. It is hard to picture a thought, let alone one that is alive. Since we can't see information, the idea of something so abstract having a tangible form boggles the mind. SCP-3002 is capable of shapeshifting, and while it does not possess its own consistent shape, the entity is able to transform itself into the form of any piece of information it chooses. Existing as pure information means that it is intangible to any beings that possess physical bodies. But what makes SCP-3002 a threat to everyone at the Foundation and earned this entity its Keter classification is its power to manipulate a person's mind or memories, allowing SCP-3002 to directly enter human minds. Moving at the speed that thoughts can travel through the brain, this entity is almost impossible to kill or kept contained. SCP-3002 can spread like a sickness through a human population, attacking new minds and taking control of its victims. According to the Foundation's research, there is only one way to remove the influence of SCP-3002. Anyone that comes under the control of this entity has to undergo complex, intricate, and risky brain surgery in order to physically remove the entity from their minds. However, the Foundation considers this method to be impractical, time-consuming, cost-ineffective, and is rendered utterly pointless if SCP-3002 has infected too much of a subject's mind. So instead, in order to prevent the spread of SCP-3002's influence, all Foundation personnel are instructed to terminate any person contaminated by this living thought. This order is extended to that individual's family, friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances. Given that SCP-3002 can take the form of any information it chooses, written words, a sound, even a telepathic signal, anyone even remotely linked to someone the entity infects has to be destroyed to stop any potential spread. If you or anyone you knew were to come into contact with SCP-3002, the entity would be able to take control of your entire consciousness. All your memories would be ripe for the entity's picking. SCP-3002 is able to sift through your temporal lobe where memories are stored, and can not only destroy and delete an infected person's memories, but can also create false memories to replace them. And all the while, you would be completely unaware that this was happening to you, stripped of all your natural survival instincts while SCP-3002 runs riot in your brain. There is currently no known limit to how much of someone's mind SCP-3002 is able to mimic, rewrite, alter, or remove. When the entity alters one of your memories, that memory will become an additional instance of SCP-3002. In other words, it can implant itself in every moment of your life. making itself a part of everything you remember about your own personal past and even the parts you can't. Once SCP-3002 has spread itself to every piece of information stored inside your brain, the next stage of infection begins, and SCP-3002 is able to take full control of a person's body. Much like before, this could be happening to you without you ever being consciously aware of it. Usually this doesn't come to much, and infected victims will carry on their day-to-day lives, acting no different to how they would normally. That is until SCP-3002 detects a new target that hasn't been infected yet. When this happens, any people previously exposed to SCP-3002 will collectively seek out the uncontaminated individual, capturing them. Once this happens, SCP-3002's infected army will force their new victim to join them. The SCP Foundation considers SCP-3002 to be extremely hostile and a major threat to their organization and the world at large. Due to SCP-3002 being uncontainable and able to infinitely adapt, it has evaded capture or termination for a considerable length of time. Having the ability to spread among human beings via the information we share with each other, speech, texts, emails, phone calls, any information at all, means that potentially any and all information could contain SCP-3002. According to calculations of the Foundation's top researchers, 78% of humanity may be under the influence of SCP-3002 without any awareness that they have been infected. While dangerous and unstoppable, SCP-3002 doesn't operate purely on instinct. It doesn't infect as many minds as it can just because it knows no other way. Everything that SCP-3002 does is a premeditated, calculated decision with one nefarious intention, one goal: to destroy the SCP Foundation from the inside out by killing or infecting every member of personnel. Believe it or not, SCP-3002 didn't begin life as a sentient, infectious thought. In fact, SCP-3002 was once a person, a regular human being like you or I. She even had a name, Lily Veselka. It is widely believed that Lily Veselka became what we now know as SCP-3002 due to the actions of the Foundation itself. Since becoming SCP-3002, Lily seems to have been searching for any information she can find regarding a highly secret operation conducted by the SCP Foundation known as Project Lethe. As well as this, she appears to have an interest in a number of Foundation research facilities, including Site E and an off-the-books facility located in Ukraine's Yuseninsky National Park. This is potentially where SCP-3002 was first created. If any of this is to be believed, then it would certainly explain SCP-3002's noticeable aggression towards the Foundation, and its attempts to infect its personnel as an act of revenge. After the project that turned Lily into a living thought, SCP-3002 was later encountered by the Foundation in its current form in South Rock Penitentiary. This prison, located near Lafayette, Indiana, was first visited by one Dr. Daryl Lloyd, one of the SCP Foundation's researchers. The prison psychiatrist, a woman named Dr. Suzanne Fairbank, was the first to notice the effects of SCP-3002 contamination on a number of South Rock Penitentiary's inmates. During sessions with her, several of these prisoners had mentioned an identical memory to Dr. Fairbank. The description of the memory from each of the inmates followed the same structure. The prisoner remembered taking a long walk through a forest with their best friend at the time. This detail, the best friend, is most likely SCP-3002 herself, imitating a figure from each inmate's own childhood memories. At some point in this false shared memory, all the prisoners recalled having an argument with their friend. It was later learned that the figure was Lily Veselka, approaching infected individuals in their memories to ask them questions about the project that had turned her into SCP-3002, often demanding to know, "What do you know about me?" or "Has the project finished?" The Foundation began to investigate this bizarre instance of shared anomalous memory after Dr. Suzanne Fairbank shared her findings on an internet message board, describing what she had witnessed to other psychology experts. At first, Dr. Lloyd, the Foundation's researcher sent to South Rock to gather more information, labeled the situation as low-priority research. Given SCP-3002's ability to adapt and take the form of any information, it was able to avoid immediate detection by the SCP Foundation, and the full extent of Lily's abilities remained hidden. Dr. Lloyd originally classified SCP-3002 as safe, believing it was a little more than a shared childhood memory that the South Rock inmates had described. At first, those that had been infected with this collective memory were able to recount it with perfect accuracy. But as Dr. Lloyd continued to interview and test the affected inmates, the details became scarier, and the memory became less and less defined the further the SCP Foundation looked into it. Perhaps Lily recognized the Foundation's presence and remembered that they were the ones responsible for turning her into a sentient mimetic entity without physical form, and started hiding her tracks. Maybe she was biding herself time, hiding herself away in the minds of the infected prisoners until the time was right. Little did Dr. Lloyd realize at the time just how far SCP-3002's influence had already spread. Lily wasn't just in the inmates' heads, but almost all of the prison staff too, who were now spreading her further and further without even realizing it. Thinking that SCP-3002 would be easy to contain, Dr. Lloyd had the Foundation administer amnestics to all the infected inmates. Amnestics are memory-altering drugs that the SCP Foundation uses to prevent any information about SCPs becoming known to the public. When dealing with mimetic anomalies like SCP-3002 or SCP-2440, amnestics can be particularly useful in removing a person's memories about a mimetic SCP. Dr. Lloyd hoped that this would be the case at South Rock, still thinking SCP-3002 was nothing more than an anomalous shared memory that could be removed. However, removing the false memory that Lily had implanted in the prisoners would not remove her from all their other memories. Additionally, one of the infected inmates was not given amnestics and was brought back to the Foundation for observation. From there, SCP-3002's influence had been able to spread like a sickness through the ranks of the Foundation's own personnel, without their knowledge or detection. Every person whose mind SCP-3002 is able to reach becomes an unwitting carrier for the infectious living thought. It is unknown exactly how many of the SCP Foundation's members are under the control of SCP-3002, granting Lily access to the wealth of secret information and plans that the Foundation keeps hidden. It doesn't matter what level of clearance someone would need to view it. If it's information, it's another way for SCP-3002 to spread. And information, as we know, can take any form, be it a written file, a spoken conversation, or even an informative YouTube video. Now tell me again about the time that we took a walk together in the forest. Hello again. It's good to have you back. And yes, we really do mean you. We're aware that you watch a lot of these videos, drinking in all that classified information about some of the SCP Foundation's most top-secret anomalies. You probably think you're pretty slick, don't you? As if nobody could see you peering in. And even if they could, they wouldn't remember it soon after. Yes, you're a very clever anomaly. We wouldn't even think of arguing against that. That's why this video is about you, SCP-3393. Don't be alarmed, we're on the same page here. We know that you access these files, particularly the files regarding yourself and your own activities. We know that you're on the shy side, and we definitely appreciate that. Unlike our other shy guy, you don't brutally murder everyone who witnesses you. Your greatest crime is accessing and even tampering with SCP Foundation files without permission. But seeing as the Foundation is cold, not cruel, we can think we can forgive that little indiscretion of yours for the greater good. All we ask for is your attention and a few minutes of your time. You're a vain creature, who or whatever you are, so we know you wouldn't even resist the opportunity to hear what we have to say about you. And for the record, you are one of the few people who are actually witnessing this video in the way you're witnessing it right now. It's for your eyes only, so to speak, SCP-3393. This video, its description, and even the coding of its comments section is filled with state-of-the-art mimetic agents cooked up by our best and brightest. To everyone except you, the researcher heading your case, the head of the Anti-Mimetics Division, and a single member of the O5 Council, this is just your average run-of-the-mill video. This is a private conversation between you and the Foundation, SCP-3393. We hope you don't mind the designation. It's not like we know your real name, but we can make some rather educated guesses. We actually know very little about you on the whole. a fact we hope to change in the future. Much like several other anomalies we have files on, such as SCP-055 The Self-Keeping Secret, and SCP-2256 The Very Tall Things, information recorded about you isn't exactly sustainable. It becomes forgotten or unreadable shortly after it's noted down. It's a clever anomalous ability, and one we've only been able to counteract with the application of powerful amnestic drugs. But clearly that isn't the only thing you have going for you. How do you think you've been able to access all of these videos, filled with classified information about anomalies, groups of interest, and even the inner workings of the Foundation itself? Through methods currently unknown to us, you've been able to somehow give your account level 4 clearance, giving you free reign over almost every file available. As much as it shames us to admit it, we haven't been able to remove this unpermitted clearance from your account, or even locate it for that matter. Like we've said before, you're a very clever anomaly. We respect that about you, even though you've been using this apparently crafty sapiens to inconvenience us. Our best guess is that you owe much of your success to powerful anti-memetic properties inherent to your anomalous being. But if we're off the mark on that, do feel free to enlighten us. Speaking of guesses, let's get back to what we think we know about you. After all, that's why you're really here, isn't it? No point being bashful, SCP-3393. You may be good at hiding yourself, but your intentions are plain as day. You don't need to be a senior researcher here to intuit that much about you. The following are all facts we believe we know about you with 90% confidence. You'll have to let us know how close we were in the end. Assumption number 1. You are a corporeal entity. That's right. You probably wanted us to assume that you were some kind of digital ghost, didn't you? Some mysterious, ethereal thought form existing only in the realm of cyberspace while you sneak around Site-31 making mischief. We're afraid that the ghost has been given up, so to speak. As clever as you are, it isn't quite as clever as you believe yourself to be. You've gotten sloppy at times, and in these moments you've given us a wealth of evidence. Don't you think the Foundation researchers and guards, people trained to notice even the most minute anomalous interference, wouldn't notice doors opening and closing on their own? Equipment moving, computer terminals activated despite no digital trace of approved Foundation login credentials. We must say we're a little insulted by how much you've underestimated us here. We know the files you've accessed. We know that you're aware of some of the monstrosities the Foundation deals with: ghosts, deadly viruses, reality warpers, some creatures that can shapeshift or become invisible, deadly memes for goodness sake. Did you really think our personnel would see the signs of your meddling and think, it was probably nothing? That's a rather dangerous oversight on your part. Assumption number 2. You're attracted to information about yourself. Don't try to deny this one, SCP-3393. The fact you're still watching this video is proof of your self-obsession, and you've left your digital fingerprints all over any other file that made the mistake of mentioning you. We have pages upon pages of logs showing your long record of unauthorized access, and the grand majority of the files you accessed were about you. Like we said, you're a vain little creature. That much is plain to see. This leads us nicely on to assumption number 3. You seek out this information about yourself in order to make changes to it, or even delete it entirely if it displeases you. We'll admit this one we find the most frustrating. It's one thing to access files without our permission, quite another to mess with our hard work. We get enough problems from Technical Director Rosen already without needing to constantly pester him about improving file security. The file about you has undergone a number of needless modifications and deletions. The following was a personal favorite. Quote, Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. Don't worry, I can handle this. Description. I wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to exist. At least not like this. But let me deal with it. This thing that I am is best kept away from all of you. Don't try to analyze me or test me or whatever. I don't want any of you to catch what I have. Just call me self-containing and we'll be good. End quote. We suppose you thought this one was pretty funny, right? You're clearly an intelligent creature, who or whatever you are, but the clear arrogance on display here doesn't suit you. While you may coast off of your anti-memetic properties, it is important to remember that you aren't untouchable. Speaking of which, Assumption number 4. Your anti-memetic properties can be transferred. We found this to be a particular interesting wrinkle in your story. We know you've got a sense of humor, so you'll have to appreciate the irony in your attempts to alter or destroy information about yourself, telling us more about you than we ever knew before. Initially, when other files were reported missing, we thought you must have been deleting them out of spite. However, upon further examination, we found that the files were still very much there, and you were the last user to access them. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing about you, and we don't even know if you knew it until now. Your anti-memetic properties have a tendency to rub off and affect the things you interact with. With a power like that, you could compromise the whole database. And obviously, we can't allow that to happen. Assumption number 5. You have a strong resistance to memetic agents, much to our frustration. We know that they can affect you, of course, but your tolerance is far higher than that of the average human being. We needed to load this video with some of our very best just to make sure it would actually work. Your memetic resistance has even foiled certain prior containment attempts. So you've really been making us earn our keep, SCP-3393. Assumption number 6. You are confined to Site-31. This is another inconvenient truth for you, isn't it? First, we need to figure out you're a corporeal being, existing out here in space-time with the rest of us, and then we figure out exactly which space and time you're occupying. Can you feel the net tightening around you, 3393? Of course, we don't want you to be nervous. Just sit tight and enjoy the video. You're a very clever anomaly after all. Far too clever to be contained by the likes of us. You've been performing your operations right under the noses of Site-31's most talented personnel. All the phenomenon we've been attributing to you, from the open doors to the tampered computer terminals, have occurred exclusively in Site-31. And while we may not be able to track down your account and strip it of its phony clearances, did you know we can log which computer terminals unauthorized access to our files comes from? That's just basic cybersecurity, and we don't need to tell you that all of your unauthorized accesses have been logged to Site-31 terminals. Very sloppy, 3393. Or should we call you Dr. Mackey? Forgive us if that isn't your name. We hate to jump to conclusions here at the Foundation, but we couldn't help but notice that your anomalous activity began shortly after a researcher named Dr. Mackey disappeared from Site-31. Interestingly, much like you, Dr. Mackey isn't remembered by anyone else on the site. We only know Dr. Mackey worked here from records we discovered not too long ago. We know that Dr. Mackey was conducting experiments here, though data on the particulars of those experiments have been destroyed by you, we presume. We also presume that you were most likely either Dr. Mackey or the product of one of Dr. Mackey's experiments. We've made a few attempts to nab you already, but you've always slipped through the cracks. Like the sweep of Site-31 where we sent in MTF-810 See No Evil, our team that specializes in combating visual cognito hazards. Those guys are tough cookies, and they're damn good at their job, so it is a mystery how you evaded them. Our current best guess is that you were hiding in some undocumented location within the site. Our attempts at memetic incapacitation were equally unsuccessful. As we mentioned before, it's clear that you have a greater resilience to memetic agents than any of your non-anomalous counterparts. We estimate that even a kill agent would probably do little more than weaken you. That is impressive, we'll give you that. Our estimation for why you've been able to so handedly thwart our attempts at containing you is that your access to the system has also given you access to all of our plans. You know exactly what's going on before we even execute the attempt, giving you time to think up and execute an effective countermeasure. But we here at the Foundation believe that knowledge is power, SCP-3393, and we have more than enough to finally contain you. Don't panic, it's already essentially over, but we'll do you the courtesy of explaining how we got you in the end. Welcome to Operation Bait the Hook. We know you're within Site-31, and we know you're attracted to information about yourself. So we limited the scope of where this handy little video could be viewed to 5 terminals in the site. We put measures in place to notify us whenever the file was accessed, and from which terminal, at which point MTF-810 would be dispatched to seal off all available exits and quarantine the room around the terminal, a process that would only take several minutes. Just enough time for a vain little creature to watch a video about itself, as it's forever entombed within the telltale terminal that finally gave it away. you wouldn't be brought into a containment chamber, so we simply brought the containment chamber to you. As the network connections for this particular terminal are shut off, we can safely say you won't be causing us problems anymore. You're a very clever anomaly, SCP-3393, just not quite as clever as us. If you ever take a trip across the pond to some of the more rural parts of the British Isles, you might just hear some tales of a dark, shadowy shape, a creature stalking through the night, an omen of death. It's an entity that has been known by many names, including the Grim or Black Shuck. Most folks will tell you the same, that this nightmare takes on the form of a huge black dog, but is also known to be able to change its shape. Often appearing at nighttime, the apparition is said to be demonic in nature, commonly associated with the devil himself, believed by some to be a hellhound like Garmer and Cerberus, guardians of the underworld in Norse and Greek mythology. The dog is far larger than your average pet, with big glowing eyes. It is also known to stalk crossroads, ancient pathways, and places where executions took place. Those who catch sight of Black Shuck are often befallen with bad luck, and for some it can even mean that death will soon be upon them. Of course, this is nothing more than a bit of local folklore, spooky tales designed to drum up tourism. But is the Black Shuck really just a legend, or is there something more to the tale? After all, it's not as if a dog like that could really exist, could it? Enter SCP-023, otherwise known as, yes, you guessed it, the Black Shuck. Much like the creatures from the stories, SCP-023 is an entity possessing a canine form, far larger than most domesticated dogs. SCP-023 is described as being shaggy in appearance, with black fur and glowing orange-red eyes, as well as prominent fangs. Through testing, the SCP Foundation has determined a number of the dog's anomalous abilities. First and foremost, legends have described the Black Shuck as an apparition or spirit, and much in the same vein, SCP-023 is able to pass right through solid matter. The creature can pass through walls seemingly at will, but does also seem to have a physical form, at least when it is kept in containment. To prevent a breach, the Foundation keeps SCP-023 in a walled-off intersection of 2 corridors, sporting fake doors at 3 of its 4 ends, with only one real entrance. Why does the dog's containment unit require such a specific layout? Simple. It has to resemble a crossroad, even if this is merely a superficial resemblance. Remember that the Black Shuck of legend often appeared at crossroads, a sign that would warn those traveling of their impending doom. As long as SCP-023 remains contained in a cell resembling crossroads, it cannot pass through walls. Should the Black Shuck ever escape this enclosure, however, then it will use its anomalous abilities to incinerate anything in its path. The dog can burn through walls no matter how dense, and will travel from location to location by this method. Also in keeping with the Shuck of folklore, looking into the eyes of SCP-023 can hold potentially devastating outcomes. Should any person make direct eye contact with the dog, then death will be upon them. Within the span of the next full year, either the person who looked at the Black Shuck in the eye or a close member of their family will die, just like a number of the legends state. The Foundation has no concrete idea how the Shuck chooses its victims, with no patterns or obvious preferences, only that they will die a year after eye contact. Researchers aren't even sure if SCP-023 selects its victims from the moment eye contact is made, or if this choice is made during the year that follows, or even if it is a conscious choice at all. All that is known for certain is that if you were to look into the beast's glowing eyes, there would be no way for you to tell if you or a relative would suffer the consequences, only when. In the past, the SCP Foundation attempted to eliminate an individual that looked into SCP-023's eyes, along with their whole family before the year was up, trying to take any potential victims away from the Black Shuck before they could be hunted down by the anomalous canine. Much like the way the creature passes through walls by incinerating solid matter, the way SCP-023 dispatches its chosen victims seem to almost be linked to the use of heat. The Foundation has conducted a number of autopsies on those killed by SCP-023, and their findings have always yielded the same result. Anyone killed by the Black Shuck will not exhibit any signs of external damage, no burn marks on their skin or any kind of contusions. However, on closer inspection, these bodies appear to have been filled in, their insides replaced with highly compacted ash. All their organs and internal bodily systems appear to be incinerated by the Black Shuck, but somehow this occurs so rapidly that there is no notable damage caused to the outside of their bodies. To prevent SCP-023 claiming any further victims, the Foundation has another measure in place. The Black Shuck has been fitted with 2 spheres made of hard rubber. These are inserted into the creature's sunken-in eye sockets, blocking anyone from accidentally making eye contact with it. However, over time, thanks to the heating effect of the Shuck's state, these inserts will begin to degrade. When security cameras detect that the glow of SCP-023's eyes have returned to a dangerous level, Foundation personnel will have to replace the rubber spheres to once again block the creature's vision. However, this can only be done after sunset, and any personnel tasked with replacing the inserts are cautioned not to look the dog in the eyes during the process, unless they want to become the Black Shuck's next victim. The SCP Foundation first came into contact with SCP-023 when they received information about an attack that had taken place at a church. While the location of this incident is unknown, if the legends are to be believed, the church may have been located in the moors of a rural region of the British Isles. While the church was in the middle of a service, the Black Shuck entered and killed a number of civilians in attendance. Presumably, the members of this congregation had all at some point seen the large black dog out in the moors, or one of their relatives had. The Foundation stepped in and managed to capture the Black Shuck, giving amnestics to the survivors that had witnessed the attack. The damage done by SCP-023 and the deaths it caused were covered up as attempted arson. However, the Foundation's trouble with SCP-023 was far from over. After the Black Shuck's capture at the church, the dog was able to breach containment on multiple occasions. At first, it had been placed in a standard containment chamber, but it was quickly able to incinerate through the concrete walls of the cell. Foundation personnel later discovered that the dog had settled in an intersection between 2 corridors and realized that it had resembled a crossroad. These exact corridors became the basis for SCP-023's new containment chamber, and the assistant researcher originally assigned to the dog was reprimanded for negligence. During this and other escape attempts, SCP-023 caused the deaths of a high number of Foundation personnel. As a direct result, researchers assigned to it requested that the Black Shuck be reclassified as a Keter-class anomaly. They also noted that SCP-023 shared certain traits with SCP-1111-1, one of the 2 entities that form SCP-1111. SCP-1111-1, also referred to as the White Dog, possesses an almost ghostly translucent canine form and abilities that focus on geographic space. In the White Dog's case, it will attack anyone it detects approaching SCP-1111-2, the body of an unidentified man hanging from a noose. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 might be instances of the same phenomenon, but have been unable to capture the White Dog in order to verify this. Given the number of deaths the Black Shuck had caused, research personnel attempted to reduce the danger that they faced when interacting with the dog. They helped to remove the beast's eyes and teeth, thus making it safer. However, it was during an attempt to do so that SCP-023 once again managed to breach containment. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but when researchers removed SCP-023's eyes, the Black Shuck vanished completely from its containment area. SCP security staff scoured the area for it, eventually tracking the dog down to a long stretch of interstate. It is still unknown exactly how many civilians may have seen the Black Shuck as they drove past it, but so far 9 deaths are thought to have stemmed from this incident. The ghostly dog was recaptured, and D-Class personnel removed its fangs. After analyzing the times of incidents, researchers realized that SCP-023 had only been able to escape while the sun was up, leading to new containment procedures mandating that no staff member was to interact with the Shuck until after sunset. The interstate fiasco led to the doctor assigned to watch over SCP-023 being suspended and facing a disciplinary review from his Foundation superiors. The blame for the breach in security that caused the incident was placed at his feet, and a new doctor was placed in charge of observing the Black Shuck. Unfortunately for this new researcher, the incidents involving SCP-023 did not stop there. The newly appointed doctor attempted to give the dog a pair of glass eyes to replace the ones that had been removed before the previous containment breach. Perhaps they thought it was a gesture of kindness, a compassionate act, or maybe they just thought it would look cool for a dog to have glass eyes. No matter the reason, it seemed they had forgotten for a moment that this huge shadow creature was an ancient evil entity and not a dog at all. When the doctor gave the new glass eyes to SCP-023, they immediately took on the exact same properties as its old ones. They began glowing, molten glass leaking from the dog's sockets, and appeared on all reflective surfaces throughout the site the Shuck was being held at. Everything from mirrors and windows to lenses and glasses, computer monitors, anything and everything glass. The Foundation suffered an enormous number of deaths that day. Even staff sitting in the cafeteria would have seen a version of those orange glowing eyes staring at them from the bottom of their bowls, marking them for a fiery death. The facility was quickly evacuated, but the damage had already been done. Anyone that had seen a reflection of the Black Shuck's eyes would be dead within a year. Devastated, the new doctor in charge of overseeing SCP-023 blamed themselves for dooming their research team, as well as the rest of the Foundation staff in the facility. When the sun came up over the horizon, a number of D-Class personnel were sent into SCP-023's enclosure, only to find that the dog had once again vanished. The only trace it had left behind was a puddle of molten glass burning part of the floor. A year later, any and all personnel that had gazed into the Black Shuck's eyes were dead, and their remains were buried in a mass, unmarked grave near the containment facility. Despite the doctor vowing to recapture and contain SCP-023, it remains unclear if they were ever actually successful. There is a chance that the Black Shuck has been gradually making its way back home, to the moors of the British Isles. If so, we advise you not to travel after sundown unless you absolutely have to. And if you find yourself at a crossroad, then pray you don't catch sight of a hulking demonic hound staring out at you with eyes that burn through the dark. If you do, well, we hope you enjoy your year. Researcher Ellis was having a very long day. Working at the SCP Foundation can sound like a pretty exciting job to an outsider. The problem is, when you deal with something exciting every day of your life, it starts to become as mundane as brushing your teeth or pouring your morning bowl of breakfast cereal. Over time, everything loses its magic. She had the unenviable job of double-checking the anomalies in C-Wing of Site-77, glorified box ticking. She trudged from containment chamber to containment chamber, everything seeming to be in order. Tick, tick, tick. It was all Euclid and safe-class anomalies anyway, hardly major containment risks. But when she reached the chamber for SCP-6805, the security cameras normally used to observe the anomaly were on the fritz. She'd need to go inside. Great. When the chamber doors opened, she felt an immediate chill. Her breath came out as an icy fog. In the distance, she saw a jar sitting on a podium, the glass so frosted over she couldn't quite make out what was inside. No sign of a containment breach. She ticked the box next to SCP-2805 on her clipboard and moved on. Several hours later, Researcher Ellis was at home, finally able to relax. Since she started working at the Foundation, dealing with deadly creatures and cursed artifacts on a daily basis, she'd longed for the simple comforts of childhood in her downtime. That's why she decided to spend her evening with a warm mug of hot chocolate, a bowl of ice cream, and her favorite animated Disney movie, Mulan. She had just pressed play when she got a phone call from an unknown number. With a frustrated groan, she picked up the phone and answered. The voice on the other end was a little gravelly, but it sounded kind. His diction was old-fashioned, a man from a bygone era.
"Why, hello there, young lady. I hope this isn't a bad time," he said. "The name's Walt Disney. Perhaps you've seen some of my motion pictures. I was wondering if I could trouble you for some help with a project of mine."
This might have been some stupid prank call. Maybe Dr. Bryant or Dr. Clef was bored and decided they wanted to mess with her. The fact that she was watching a Disney movie at the time was pure coincidence. After all, they own half the movies out there these days. But that's when Walt carried on talking to her. "You see, my dear, I'm a little short on time at the moment. I realize I, perhaps don't have the longevity that I used to. I won't get into the illness right now, but what I do know is that I might not be able to put my final idea into practice, and I believe that you and your organization may be able to help. Your, what is it called? SCP Foundation?" And that changed everything. Researcher Ellis immediately knew that this wasn't a prank call. A member of Foundation staff would never discuss Foundation matters, even as a joke, over an unsecured line, and a civilian would have no reason to even know about the Foundation. Was she actually on the phone with the Walt Disney? It seemed odd and a little more than unlikely on account of him being dead for over 50 years. If only Researcher Ellis had checked her clipboard a little closer, then maybe she would have realized that she was already under the anomalous effects of SCP-6805, also humorously known as Disney on Ice. Here's a fun question for you. What's your favorite Disney movie? Probably not what you expected to hear from your friends at SCP Explained. But seriously, we want to know. Tell us down in the comments. Maybe you're a classical purist and you consider Snow White, Cinderella, or Sleeping Beauty to be the best. Maybe you're a fan of the Disney Renaissance and it's The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, or The Lion King that are the true masterpieces. Or perhaps you're a fan of their more modern outings like Tangled, Frozen, and Moana, or even their acquisitions like Marvel movies or the Star Wars series. Personally, I'm partial to Tron Legacy. We could go on, but honestly, we'd be here all day. The Walt Disney Company, started by Walter Elias Disney and his brother Roy back in 1923, has become one of the most powerful and influential entertainment companies in existence. Their corporate machine is so huge and sprawling, it rivals the size and scope of the SCP Foundation itself, and it's influenced the way we look at everything from mice to pirates to Norse legends to space battles. Some give the United States President the title Leader of the Free World, but anyone in that position would happily drop everything to take a phone call from the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, even today. The company may be a global superpower these days, but none of it would have been possible without Walt himself. Born in 1901, Walt started his legendary company at the tender age of 22. Who would have known that he would leave such an indelible mark on human culture during his 65 years of life? But he's not just an entrepreneur, animator, writer, voice actor, and film producer. He's also, decades after his death, an anomaly currently in the capable hands of the SCP Foundation. Well, his cryogenically frozen severed head is, anyway. And simply looking at that severed head is what puts such an anomalous damper on Researcher Ellis's nice, quiet evening. Confused? Don't worry. Let's start this demented Disney fairy tale at the beginning, by which we mean the end of Walt Disney's life. Walt Disney accomplished more in his life than many of us would be able to claim in several lifetimes. He'd built one of the most enduring entertainment companies of all time, won countless awards, and made millions of dollars from his creations, including the Disneyland theme parks. The man had essentially made his own name synonymous with magic, childhood whimsy, and dreams coming true. However, rather than focusing on the past, Walt wanted to keep his eyes on the future. His grand vision went far beyond movies and theme parks. He wanted to shape the way humanity lived for centuries to come. And the name of this vision? Epcot, or the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. While you may know Epcot as a mere portion of the theme park in the Florida Walt Disney Resort, Walt himself actually intended it to be so much more. As the full name suggests, he dreamed of creating a functional community of tomorrow with over 20,000 residents. In his own words, Epcot will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry. It will be a community of tomorrow that will never be completed, but will always be introducing and testing and demonstrating new materials and new systems. And Epcot will always be a showcase to the world of the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. It was certainly a utopian idea, though fans of BioShock might find their eye twitching with flashbacks to Andrew Ryan's disastrous Rapture. However, Disney's problem didn't lie in his plans, but in himself. Despite his achievements and larger-than-life legacy, he was still a mortal man. When Walt tragically contracted lung cancer, he finally became aware of the fact that he may not live to see his beautiful Epcot dream completed. And despite having all the money and fame a man could possibly ask for, he was beginning to realize that his fortune couldn't buy him a second of extra time. Or could it? This question would soon be answered when representatives of a mysterious company known as the Onoroi Collective approached Walt. The strange thing, though, was that the entities that comprised this elusive group of interests contacted Walt in his dreams. You see, the Onoroi Collective are a group of entities known as the Onoroi, or Dreamers, who exist only in the dream space, but sometimes interact with our world through anomalous, sometimes semi-organic creations they sell as products. In that sense, they were the original Imagineers. Their creations include SCP-2028, a few hundred snow globes that allow the user to remove and store their nightmares and negative feelings within, and SCP-1498, which are creatures made from old-fashioned rotary phones trailing a huge number of wires, coiled and arranged into sheep-like bodies. By calling the phone on the creature's face, a person can order a custom dreamscape from the Onoroi. Naturally, as creatures who depend on dreams to survive, the Onoroi were big fans of Walt Disney, a man who built a career of encouraging children to dream their little hearts out. In exchange for his contributions to the dreamscape, they'd cut him a deal. They'd give him a special kind of Onoroi technology that would allow his consciousness to continue to exist and interact with the physical realm after his death. All they'd need to keep was his head. It was certainly a strange deal, but Walt was thinking of his children, his grandchildren, and their children and grandchildren. If he died now, then his Tomorrowland dreams would die with him. He'd simply be known for some charming animated films and a couple of amusing theme parks, not for truly changing the future. It seemed that the deal with the Onoroi Collective was too good to resist. The deal was struck, and arrangements were made to preserve Disney's head and consciousness after his death. 10 days after his 65th birthday, on December 15, 1966, Walt Disney passed away. But that was only the beginning of his new anomalous life. While the public mourned, Disney's head was secretly removed and preserved in a jar with anomalous cryonics technology. The device is also fixed to a pair of rotary phones, a trademark of the Onoroi, and an inscription that reads, "Siberian Solutions from the Onoroi Collective." The anomalous effect was simple. Anyone who looked directly at Disney's frozen head would receive a phone call in the next 24 hours. This phone call would be from Walt Disney himself, presumably inhabiting the Onoroi dreamscape now. With this handy trick, he'd be able to maintain his communications with the rest of the Walt Disney Company in secret and see the creation of his precious Epcot project to its completion. But unfortunately, that's not actually how it happened. Following Walt's death, his brother Roy took over all Walt Disney Company operations. While the profitability of the company didn't suffer under Roy's control, Walt's final dream did. Epcot mutated from the sustainable, functional community of the future that Walt desired into a mere theme park, the Disney-fied World's Fair that all Orlando Disney Park visitors of today would recognize. As it turned out, most people in the Disney company weren't actually eager to take orders from the former CEO's severed head. As a result, he became kind of a dark company secret, hidden away within the Disney parks. After a number of reports of calls from Walt Disney after the entrepreneur's death, the Foundation finally started to take notice. They conducted a thorough investigation of the various Disney bases of operation and eventually found Disney's frozen head, soon redesignated SCP-2805, in a secret compartment in the legendary Pirates of the Caribbean ride. He was relocated to Site-77 soon after for further testing, where his anomalous abilities were later discovered. Sadly for SCP-2805, while his calls to Foundation staff have all consisted of attempts in enlisting the Foundation's help in making his Epcot dreams a reality, nobody has yet taken him up on the offer. Since his containment, the Foundation's main priority has just been suppressing conspiracy theories about the existence of Walt Disney's cryogenically frozen head, a task which they undertake with collaboration from the Disney Company. In order to muddy the waters, in 1981 they began productions of Walt Disney's World on Ice, later known as Disney on Ice, a traveling ice skating show. Since then, they also released the incredibly successful film Frozen and its sequel, to corrupt any searches for key phrases like Disney's Frozen or Walt Ice. It's been an incredibly effective smokescreen, as you can probably expect from the SCP Foundation, and sadly for Walt and fans of a mid-century perspective on the future, it's likely that Walt Disney's dreams will stay within his disembodied head. So if you're hoping to prove the existence of this truly wild anomaly, or somehow get in contact with Walt and help him bring Epcot to its intended glory, you should probably just let it go. The SCP Foundation specializes in tracking anomalous creatures, entities, or objects, and protecting mankind by keeping these anomalies contained. It doesn't happen very often, though, that an SCP surrenders itself to the Foundation, offering to be contained without putting up a fight. You might think that that would be a welcome change for the Foundation's personnel, getting an easy containment like that rather than having to devote valuable time, resources, and even lives to capturing an anomaly. But then you have to ask the obvious and worrying questions. How did this anomaly know where to find the Foundation so that it could turn itself in the first place? Did somebody send it? And if so, why? Well, don't worry. You don't need to try and imagine this scenario, because an SCP turning itself over to the Foundation under mysterious circumstances has actually already happened. One day, security personnel at an SCP Foundation containment site opened the front door to find an SCP just sitting there on the doorstep. The anomaly was brought in for questioning, and while it was soon designated SCP-032, it has sometimes been known by another name, Brother's Bride. SCP-032 is a person, or rather a replica of a person. Not a living statue that moves whenever you look away or a waxwork that comes to life when the sun goes down. No, this replica is far stranger. SCP-032 resembles a human woman around 30 years of age. Who made her, who she is supposed to resemble, and just where exactly she came from are all still questions the Foundation have been unable to answer. But what the research teams have been able to determine is what she is made from. Brother's Bride consists largely of plastics, at least the external portion of her body. Her skin is made from a combination of 5.5mm thick silicone and other plastic fiber polymers, all colored with a pigment to more closely mimic the shade of Caucasian human skin. SCP-032 has been referred to as a Type F human simulacrum by the Foundation, meaning that she has an imperfect outward resemblance to a human being, and the internal workings of her body are drastically different from an ordinary human's organs or central nervous system. What does SCP-032 have instead? Well, she lacks any skeleton or any of the other internal parts that make up a human body. Instead, her insides are entirely refined liquid oil. However, in spite of having no bones, no organs, and existing as just pure oil filling up a plastic skin, SCP-032 has no problem moving on her own or communicating verbally. When she was first discovered waiting outside the Foundation's Slovakian compound, Brother's Bride claimed that she had come there to be stored. SCP-032 is imperfect in how closely she resembles a human being, and this becomes more apparent the closer one gets to her. At a distance, she can maintain some illusion of appearing to be fully human. However, her appearance becomes less and less convincing as someone approaches. Naturally, the sight of an uncanny, rubbery, almost human is enough to unsettle someone, perhaps even cause discomfort. But this also happens to be unrelated to SCP-032's anomalous abilities, which she detailed to Foundation personnel when she was first contained. The Foundation security team that discovered SCP-032 patiently sitting and waiting to be found questioned her motives and how she had come to be there. There was no record of what time she might have arrived on the compound's security cameras, and SCP-032 gave the personnel no inkling as to how she knew the location of the Foundation's Slovakian site. Somehow, she'd managed to approach without being spotted by anyone, but would not explain how she had done so. Security personnel at the site were obviously skeptical and asked Brother's Bride why she had come to the Foundation. SCP-032 claimed that her creators had commanded her to, that she was to be placed in indefinite storage until claimed. Although the silicon-based woman appears to possess a normal level of cognitive function, she claims that she is not fully sapient, meaning SCP-032 does not possess the intelligence or understanding of other human beings, at least according to her. By her own admission, SCP-032 is an intermediary, acting on behalf of her creators, although the SCP Foundation has yet to be able to verify this. As for her anomalous abilities, SCP-032 was kind enough to detail these to the security personnel that first found her. She has an innate ability to influence any biological entity in her immediate vicinity. In other words, any organism that gets too close. Well, not quite any. There is a limitation to her power. SCP-032 can only affect a creature or organism not created by, related to, or influenced by humanity. So, plants, animals, even microorganisms like bacteria all fall into the category of things that SCP-032 has an effect on. According to the various tests the Foundation's researchers have conducted, the exact nature of how SCP-032's abilities work seems to vary, but her presence always causes massive and irreversible damage to an animal or organism's ability to exchange or use energy. For example, when SCP-032 is surrounded by wild flora, these plants will lose the ability to conduct the process of photosynthesis. They therefore can no longer produce or consume energy, preventing them from continued growth and ultimately causing death. In much the same vein, any animals that come into close contact with SCP-032 will find themselves unable to use their respiratory or digestive systems, rendering them unable to breathe oxygen or properly consume food. Not even germs and other microorganisms are safe from SCP-032's effects. Although when it comes to these microscopic life forms, her ability seems to focus solely on their reproductive systems, and if bacteria cannot divide itself, it cannot spread. At present, the SCP Foundation keeps Brothers Bride housed in an automated containment unit, restricting the amount of direct contact personnel can have with her. Unless they are there to conduct authorized experiments or other necessary research-related tasks, staff are to leave SCP-032 alone. Any interviews with her are not even carried out in person, and instead researchers use a remote communication array to ask SCP-032 more about her origin, her creators, and her abilities. This probably seems a little overcautious, right? After all, SCP-032 has no effect on the human body, and isn't aggressive or outwardly hostile. Maybe locking her in a room is excessive, but remember, her degenerative abilities do affect microorganisms and bacteria, even those that are beneficial to human beings. The human body is full of good bacteria that aids with digestion and helps the body absorb nutrients, like the ones you've heard about in ads for probiotic yogurt. Since 032's effects don't discriminate between good and bad bacteria, people have to keep their distance from SCP-032, or else they might find that they can no longer digest food properly. In fact, no biological material is allowed anywhere near her. No houseplants, no pets, nothing. Oddly, SCP-032 herself seems fine with this, and has never expressed any desire for any form of comfort, and does not appear to require sustenance like food or water. Shortly after she was first contained by the SCP Foundation, SCP-032 was interviewed by Dr. Alexander Kovac, the resident psychologist at the site where Brothers Bride was discovered. Dr. Kovac initially tried to ask SCP-032 to disclose her name. However, she was unable to do so. "I don't have one. People have names. I'm not one." She then went on to explain that even her creators had no name for her, and that she was instructed to cooperate with the SCP Foundation. Dr. Kovac pressed on, asking about when she told security that she was to be stored until collected, who SCP-032 had meant was coming to collect her. Her answer was as enigmatic as could be expected. She claimed that she was going to be collected by someone her creators wished to torment, and finding her in the hands of the SCP Foundation would bring this person greater suffering. Kovac asked if this person was part of the Foundation, assuming that SCP-032's creators had some kind of animosity towards a particular member of personnel, and that 032 was part of some kind of revenge plot against a member of Foundation's staff. SCP-032 denied this though, stating, "He is not one of you, merely a one-time sympathizer of sorts. He believes you tried to help him once, and if he is forced here, if he finds me here, you will die. That will hurt him. They have no interest in any of you or your organization. You are here as a tool, just as I am." According to SCP-032, the man coming to collect her was a prideful, complacent figure who won when he should have lost. Somehow this individual had apparently been punished by being forced to live in exile from his kin and wander the world endlessly, destroying anything in his path. yet unwillingly. His very presence would poison human beings, leaving this man trapped in eternal solitude, tormented by the weight of his guilty conscience. SCP-032 described the man's punishment as a masterwork of torment. She described her purpose in being sent to the Foundation as being to act as this man's last undoing. Apparently, this wanderer would occasionally find solace in looking at nature and find hope in the world around him. Her ability to destroy the organisms around her would be a way to break this man's will and the final nail in the proverbial coffin. Apparently, SCP-032's appearance was also seemingly meant to deceive him. She stated that the man would recognize her and this would remind him of fond memories. But then as he got closer, he would see SCP-032 for what she really was, a crude replica of a human being, reminding this man that her likeness would be forever out of his reach. SCP-032 was intended by her creators to be as artificial as the wandering man's hope, and when he eventually found her, either in a day, a month, or in a century, she would destroy his very last source of solace. At the conclusion of the interview, Dr. Kovac asked why this man would recognize her, and SCP-032 simply replied, "I used to be his wife." If we take SCP-032 at her word, then it appears she was created with the intention of being used to torment this wandering man and act as a final punishment for him. In another interview 6 months after her initial containment, SCP-032 expressed a hatred for the man's wife whom she was made to resemble. Sent in to assess SCP-032's cognitive abilities and personality, or lack of, Dr. Kovac questioned this. SCP-032 had always been adamant that she had no conscious thoughts or feelings of her own, and when challenged by the doctor, she claimed that she hated her mold because her creators wanted her to. The first thing SCP-032's creators had done after making her was show her the wife of the man they hoped to torment. It is unclear whether SCP-032 was shown photographs or the actual woman she had been molded from. Not an easy task, as this woman, the wife, was apparently long dead. But the creators had risked disturbing the wife's final rest, just to show her to SCP-032. She was beautiful, so peaceful, serene, whole, even gone, even dead. I could see the essence of who she used to be, of who she still was and forever will be, her soul. They told me she didn't get to live for all that long, but when she lived, she was herself. She was alive, and so I hated her. In the wife's face, SCP-032 saw a reflection of herself and realized that she had been made just to be a mockery, a parody of a living human being existing only to cause misery to the wandering man who would one day find her. Instead of skin, she had molded silicone and plastic synthetic fiber in place of hair, and oil for blood. But what SCP-032 lacked, she realized, was a soul. This was all part of the brothers' design, according to SCP-032. When the man found her, he would see not only what had been done to the memory of his wife, but he'd also see how much SCP-032 hated her, and hated herself for not being alive the same way the wife had been. The goal of all of this, to make the man realize that he never won. SCP-032 herself is a mystery, but perhaps the real question is, who do you think this man is, and what was it he didn't win? But that's a story for another day. Let us know what you think down in the comments. A shot zipped past his head, narrowly missing, leaving an indent on the wall mere inches away. He froze, peeking out from cover, scanning the area for any sign of the enemy. Nothing, not a single movement. But still, he didn't feel the least bit safe. There was a more secure stronghold, a bunker only a short dash from where he was squatting. Gripping his weapon close to his chest, Private Mitchell took a deep breath, psyching himself up before rushing across the battlefield towards what he hoped would be better cover. Ducking under a camouflage tarp that covered the entrance, Mitchell was met with a sight of his squad mates, all sitting huddled in the foxhole, some looking dejected and miserable, others cowering in fear, all apart from Sergeant King, who sat cross-legged in one corner, wearing a permanently crazed, wide-eyed stare on his face. An exhausted Private Mitchell sat down with the others, unable to offer more insight than a nod of mutual condolence to his comrades. For a while, the members of MTF Iota-17, the unit codenamed the Greendale Humans, found themselves feeling the simultaneous mix of frightened and bored. Each one of them could have achieved the same sense of anxiety by drinking 10 cups of black coffee, loudly knocking on their drill sergeant's door in the middle of the night, then rushing back to their barracks to hide under their bunks. Movement from outside caused the whole team's heads to swivel, peeking out of a gap in the outer wall of the bunker. They saw the enemy immediately. Two of the ghostly incorporeal figures roaming the battlefield outside, not to be underestimated despite the baggy, oversized tactical gear they wore, and weapons that looked too big for them. And two outside meant the other three were still out there somewhere. One gave a nod to the other, instructing him to scour the area surrounding the bunker. Mitchell was terrified, and all too aware that there were too many of them in the bunker. The enemy was bound to find them soon. All of a sudden, Sergeant King seemed to stir from his strange trance and produced a box of matches. He held out 4 in his hand, keeping them covered so that nobody could tell if they were picking a long one or a short one. The first of MTF Iota-17, Private Davis, reached for a match as they were offered, his heart dropping as Sergeant King pointed it was a short one. Next, Private Byron picked out a match, a long one. Private Mitchell's pulse skyrocketed as Sergeant King offered him the remaining 2, knowing that one would be long, the other short. He reached out and plucked a short one. King explained that the first short straw and the first long straw go. Bad luck, Byron and Davis, but I don't make the rules. Byron, not wanting to be at the mercy of the spirits, protested that those rules seemed made up. But Private Mitchell, even less eager to go out there, affirmed the sergeant's logic. Hanging their heads, both Private Byron and Private Davis gathered up their weapons and sluggishly walked out of the bunker. Moments later, still safe inside, Private Mitchell overheard the enemy taking fire, followed by the sound of splattering and yelps of pain from his 2 fallen squad mates. He offered a concerned look to Sergeant King, whose wide-eyed expression was doing little to ease Mitchell's nerves. They got our boys good, King muttered, rocking slightly. Tagged them like the Bowery Wall. Still, lucky they didn't get hit by the cannonball. Mitchell asked in disbelief whether the enemy really had their hands on a cannon. No, the cannonball's just their name for it, the sergeant said solemnly. I've never seen it myself, but I heard rumors. Apparently these incorporeal delinquents sneak a steel ball in with their ammo. That's their way of keeping things interesting. Who was it that said war is hell, or was it war makes people crazy? Crazy. I was crazy once. Mitchell sighed and asked why they don't just throw in the towel and surrender. You know darn well why, the mad commanding officer barked. Chaos, mass hysteria, a whole new mess for the Foundation to clean up. And you listen here. Maybe you can live with that, but not me. Not on my watch. The private asked to be let in on the battle plan, unsure if he was more scared of Sergeant King or the enemy outside. We should drag one of them in here. Get him to give up enemy intel, King answered in a sinister, unhinged tone. He didn't respond well when told that the intangibility of the enemy may make holding one of them hostage, well, impossible. Still living in a fantasy, are you, Private? King chuckled maniacally and didn't stop for a full, unsettling minute. Look, I've had it up to here with the enemy and their dirty tactics. I say it's time we went full Return of the Jedi. We're the Ewoks and they're the Empire. Now belt up and bear out. Grabbing his weapon, Sergeant King suddenly hopped to his feet and bellowed, letting out a primal scream up towards the heavens. Then he rushed out of the bunker, screaming his own name until a barrage of enemy fire opened up from all directions. Still cowering in the safety of the bunker, Private Mitchell sighed again as he looked at his commanding officer covered in splatters of paint. Fortunately for Mitchell and the rest of MTF Iota-17, the injuries they had sustained in the line of duty were non-fatal, save for a few bruised egos and some stubborn paint stains on their uniforms that took a lot of seltzer water and lemon to wash out. The unfortunate downside, however, was that their defeat led to a localized anomalous event. The perpetrators of that incident, 5 ghost-like entities with a bad habit of painting the town red. Literally. Meet SCP-6669, sometimes more commonly referred to as the 29-Year Paintball War. See if you can guess how it got that nickname. Located on the outskirts of Krakow, Poland, one can find an abandoned building that was previously used as an indoor paintballing venue. But now it's known to the SCP Foundation by its designation of SCP-2629. Inhabiting the location are a number of incorporeal entities. collectively known as SCP-2629-A. These are humanoid in their shape and behavior, but largely intangible. However, there are a few caveats to that which we'll circle back to. As for their appearance, despite being somewhat translucent, facial recognition software deployed by the Foundation has determined that these so-called ghosts bear a resemblance to a group of 5 teenagers, all of whom died during a driving accident. According to local police records, these deaths took place approximately 5 kilometers outside of Krakow, and there are no existing records that indicate the teenagers in question ever frequented the paintball venue, while they were alive anyway. Now, we mentioned not too long ago that these 5 entities aren't entirely incorporeal, or at least they aren't 100% intangible. The exceptions here are the projectiles fired from their weapons. In this case, standard paintballs with no anomalous properties remain physically tangible. They interact with the world in the same way you would expect any normal paintball to, splattering on impact with solid matter, usually a hard surface or a human target. And this exception to intangibility also works the same way in reverse. Any paintballs fired at any of SCP-2629-A will have the same expected effect. Any and all attempts by the SCP Foundation to engage in direct communications with SCP-2629-A have resulted in failure. While they will often engage in banter and trash talk with their opposition during games, they seem to be uninterested in talking about anything other than paintball. During one attempt by Foundation researcher Dr. Ben Kazarinsiak to talk with the entities and ask why they spend eternity in a paintball arena, the only answer given by one of the anomalous ghosts, SCP-2629-A-2, was, "Why not?" Every afternoon at exactly 1 o'clock Central European Time, all members of SCP-2629-A will manifest within SCP-2629. Should they be left unattended, they will begin to roam freely, often gravitating towards the nearby neighborhood. This can lead to an event classified as an Aleph 2629 scenario. However, the occurrence of an Aleph scenario can be averted should the 5 entities be engaged in a game of paintball. It is the only known measure to deter them, and as such, the SCP Foundation has assigned Mobile Task Force Iota-17 to deal with the problem. Every day, all members of MTF Iota-17, the Greendale humans, enter the paintball facility via an underground tunnel. Each of these operatives possesses a high level of proficiency in marksmanship, as well as close-quarters combat utilizing firearms. On top of that, the Foundation insists that MTF troops in this unit also need to be great at paintball. The Foundation's MTF agents must engage the 5 members of SCP-2629-A in a game of paintball shortly after the entities manifest at 1 o'clock. The games follow the traditional capture the flag rules, wherein both teams have a flag that they need to protect, while also being tasked with securing the opposing team's flag. Should the Foundation's pro paintballers be successful in winning the match, then all instances of SCP-2629-A will demanifest peacefully until they return at the same time the following day. But should the 5 ghostly teammates prevail, or if MTF Iota-17 breaks any of the conventional paintball rules, then this will trigger an Aleph 2629 scenario. But exactly how long has this protracted paintball war been going on for? Well, the clue is in the nickname. All the way back in 1988. The SCP Foundation received reports of unusual vandalism taking place in the area near Krakow. That might have been enough to pique their initial interest, but the sudden reported sightings of ghosts by local civilians was what really made them take interest. Descending on the small area outside of Krakow, the Foundation launched a full-scale investigation into SCP-2629. Given what we now know about the anomaly, it seems that with no one to challenge them, the 5 paintballing entities were free to enact an Aleph 2629 scenario unobstructed. Once the Foundation discovered the site of SCP-2629 and determined it to be the source of the local anomalous activity, they got to work evacuating the immediate vicinity of the abandoned paintball arena and devising containment procedures to keep unwitting civilians from getting caught in the crossfire of an imminent paint-slinging conflict. As far as the public would know, the abandoned SCP-2629 venue was shut down thanks to a hazardous amount of asbestos. Its entrances were sealed off to deter vandals and would-be urban explorers. But in reality, the Foundation was keeping people out so that the first match between their team, MTF Iota-17, and the 5 members of SCP-2629-A could commence. The battle was relentless, paintballs flying in all directions, splattering any in their path. The Foundation lost a lot of good men that day, although they quickly found them again once they'd cleaned up all the paint. In an attempt to shift the tide of battle and turn the odds in the Foundation's favor, MTF operatives rearranged some of the indoor playing field. This, however, was an ill-advised strategic misstep, as messing with the venue's cover violated the established rules of paintball, and doing so caused an ALIF 2629 scenario to begin. In response, a number of ALIF 2629 procedures have been put in place to combat the anomalous event. Staff at Site-19 had to equip the protective paintballing gear stored at their workstations or in lockers around the facility. If any of them couldn't access their gear, the next best thing Foundation personnel could do was cover their eyes and ears until the event passed. Any and all delicate equipment had to be stored for safety purposes. Security staff are tasked with making sure any SCPs that might be vulnerable are kept out of harm's way. The Foundation currently has no way of barring SCP-2629-A's access to areas, thanks to their incorporeality. However, they can be deterred by being presented with an abundance of targets. Staff are to remain on high alert until the ALIF 2629 scenario is over, and the all-clear signal sounds. With all this preparation taking place at Site-19 no less, you'd expect an ALIF 2629 scenario to entail something pretty catastrophic. It wasn't always such an issue. During the initial decade following SCP-6669's discovery, the ALIF scenario used to entail the 5 SCP-2629-A entities roaming the nearby area of Krakow and opening fire on people and property with their paintball guns. Hardly a paint-based war crime, but definitely goes an unnecessary extra mile in terms of vandalism. Then again, you try being stuck for an eternity in a paintball arena. Sometimes it's nice to stretch the invisible space where your legs used to be. And by now you've probably made the connection, the unusual vandalism that drew the Foundation to SCP-2629 in the first place was the ghostly teenage paintballers literally painting the town whenever they manifested, only to fade away after a few hours. But that's only what the ALIF scenario used to entail. It happened during the 12th consecutive year of the Paintball War. A third MTF loss against SCP-2629-A caused yet another ALIF scenario to activate. But this time, instead of roaming the local neighborhood, the incorporeal teens' victory sent them to one of the Foundation's most highly guarded facilities, Site-19. Multiple unsuspecting Foundation research personnel were splattered with paint, the first of the Paintball War's casualties to fall outside of a 250-meter radius from SCP-2629. The Foundation launched an inquiry into how these 5 incorporeal anomalies were able to breach the security of Site-19, citing loose lips among MTF Iota-17 about Site-19. As such, they were banned from ever mentioning Foundation operations during their paintball skirmishes with SCP-2629-A. However, the lasting damage was already done, and unlike a paintball splatter, there was no wiping this away or covering it up. Every loss that MTF Iota-17 incurred in the coming years would result in all 5 of SCP-2629-A manifesting within Site-19, celebrating their capture the flag victories by committing paintball retribution against Foundation personnel. Staff and corridors were splattered with paint, and attempts to return paintball fire were unsuccessful in dispersing the incorporeal attackers. One researcher even sustained an eye injury after being struck in the eye by a stray paintball. As the years rolled on, MTF Iota-17's losses began to increase rapidly. More and more ALIF 2629 scenarios were occurring each year. Foundation facilities abruptly and messily redecorated by a volley of paintballs. The Site-19 director issued a communique to the Ethics Committee, requesting the termination of SCP-2629.
MTF Iota-17 may have some of the best trained people in the world, but SCP-2629-A have been gaining experience for decades. It was only a matter of time before the skill gap closed. Anyone we recruit to fill a vacancy in MTF Iota-17 is going to need to be able to counter nearly 30 years of paintball experience, and that number is always growing.
All 5 of SCP-2629-A had already gotten tired of trashing their own neighborhood, and before long, they'd similarly get bored of trashing Site-19. The question was, once that happened, where would they hit next? Now check out SCP Chaos Insurgency Explained, and I survived 100 days infiltrating the Chaos Insurgency. Here's what happened for more.